everybody, this is Grimmy, and this is an audiobook of my ongoing series, My Father's Warmth, which is a My Hero Academia Todoroki AU. Don't expect any good voice acting from this, I'm not a voice actor, so when you're listening to this audiobook, think of more like your mum telling you a bedtime story. I will not be attempting to replicate people's voices. Don't expect that from me, please. Please. So, but yeah, just bare minimum, below average expectations from me, please. My Father's Warmth is a happy Todoroki AU fanfiction where it's a retelling of the Todoroki family story if Enji Todoroki was never traumatized and got the guidance and support he needed growing up. Another thing to consider is I am making references to the My Hero Academia Vigilante series, and I am trying to keep it as canonically accurate as possible, but because of some of the continuation errors with Vigilantes and My Hero Academia, I've tried to make it as canonically accurate as possible, but there might be some things wrong. I'm trying my best. But I am writing these references and the timeline of My Hero Academia Vigilantes alongside this story with the assumptions everybody has read it and knows what's being referenced. I'm not going to delve into detail with Vigilantes and that side of things because that's too much for my tired little brain to handle, unless it's absolutely necessary. I will be writing Vigilantes' timeline from the perspective of the Todoroki and what they know. So if you want to fully understand what's going on, go read Vigilantes. Some of the events from Vigilantes will be off, they will be wrong, they might not be accurate, but some things that needs to happen for some story stuff and my mental sanity because there's a lot to keep track of. So I tried my best to make it as canon compliant as I could, but yeah, I tried my best, that's a lot, okay, I'm sorry. Chapter 61. Animated. He used to be such a goofy little guy. I don't know when that changed. Have you ever asked him? No. Hospitals are a whole different beast to clinics. They're huge, with endless rooms, nooks and crannies that feel like a labyrinth to the unfamiliar. Cold white walls, ceiling and floor, sterilized to perfection with nurses and doctors heading from room to room with mixed levels of hurriedness depending on the unit. Toya is very familiar with the sight. All he feels is bittersweet nostalgia for his year living in a hospital. This isn't the same one as Dr. Tozura's, situated in a different part of town, and he isn't given big responsibilities as in the children's clinic. Toya is here to shadow a doctor and silently learn from the corner of a room, which he dutifully does. Despite the slight frustration at not being able to do hands-on jobs with helping patients and nurses alike, he knows it's important for him to learn from a safe distance. Every once in a while, the doctor in charge of him tests his knowledge, and depending on Toya's answer, elaborates or corrects him. Toya likes those moments. But other than that, he just follows silently, making mental notes of things to consider and taking into account for his own career. One thing he's sure of, he wants to focus on the children's ward. He never wants any child to feel alone and afraid when under his care. And while not under his care, Saiichi Higawara is included in that. Toya thinks, as he follows the doctor into the final room of his routine checkup and makes eye contact with the sandy-haired boy. Todoroki! Saiichi straightened his back at seeing his classmate's older brother, surprised, and hurriedly gets on his feet, making a small polite bow in greeting. Very different to the last time Toya had seen him. Higawara, good to see you again. You look well. Toya smiles, nodding his head at the boy Natsuo's age. Oh, you two know each other? The doctor asked. Yes, he's in my brother's class, Toya explained, hands in his doctor's coat pockets. Your brother? A woman's voice pipes up, and it's only now that Toya realizes who the patient is. I've heard so much about him. Natsuo, is it? Who might you be? Chocolate brown eyes twinkle at Toya, framed by dark brown hair cut in a French bob, and a kind smile. Saiichi's mother. I'm Toya Todoroki. I'm shadowing your doctor for my studies. The young man smiled to the sweet-looking woman. Wonderful! I hope you're learning lots, she chirped, her voice a careful yet eager whisper. I'm Amaya Higawara. Lovely to meet you. Toya looks at Saiichi. He's close to her, his hand on hers but laid on the bed she's sitting in. Compared to last time he's seen him, Saiichi looks peaceful and happy by his mother's side, and despite his lack of a smile, and eyebrows. His mother's likeness is in his features despite Saichi looking identical to his father. His eyes were the same brown as his mother's. The doctor does his checkup, Toya keeping back as the professional and his patient discuss her well-being, how she's feeling as of late, and if they found any matches for a heart transplant yet, and a surgeon willing to do the procedure. Still nothing, I'm afraid, the doctor sighed, Amaya looking downcast as he said that. Organ transplants isn't in high availability even for common blood types, but being type O negative makes it even more limiting. I'm well aware, Amaya sighed, looking back at the doctor. I've been here for 16 years. It was Saichi's turn to look downcast, shame in his eyes. All we can do is continue to take care of you here until something becomes available, the doctor said. Thanks to your sponsor, however, you have nothing to be worried about. All the costs are covered, and we are even able to go as far as looking into overseas options. Toya watched this silently, and he went unacknowledged until he turned to follow the doctor out of the room. Todoroki. He stops and looks to Amaya. Do you have time to stay and talk a little? Toya blinks, turning to the doctor to silently ask if that's okay. The doctor smiles and nods. Join me back in my office when you're done, is all he says before he leaves. Toya walks further back into the room, joining Saichi by his mother's bedside. He's sitting again on a chair close to the bed, never once having let go of his mother's hand. Toya tilted his head a little as he smiled questioningly to Amaya. I wanted to thank you for your father helping us. Toya blinked, confused as to what the woman was referring to. It's given my husband a chance to not work as hard and properly focus on Saichi. I also wanted to personally apologize for my son's behavior towards your brother. Toya saw Saichi physically shrinking on himself. Believe me, he's been told off. Toya had a feeling Snatch wasn't the one to give Saichi a harsh talking to. He's already apologized. We're all good. Toya shook his head. But I'm confused. Is my father the sponsor the doctor referred to? You didn't know? Saichi asked, surprised. Toya shook his head again, smiling to his brother's friend. Oh, I thought you did. My dad has a way of not mentioning some things if they're not relevant in the moment, Toya shrugged. I only just found out last winter that he can drive, he added with a huff, making Amaya giggle softly. Upon closer inspection, she was hooked up to a heart monitor, but it was purposefully placed in a way it was an eyesore. The room was decorated with personalized items, such as a bag of grounded coffee beans on her bedside table, including a flask of hot water and a cup of milk, but no coffee machine or grinder. Another thing that caught his eye was a neat row of painted coffee cups along the windowsill. There were 15 of them, the first one on the left being a scribbled, drippy mess, with each new edition looking neater and newer. The very last cup on the right having an intricate design, delicately painted with care. Amaya reached for the bag of grounded coffee and pulled out a scoopful of the brown powder with a before-unseen spoon. Would you like some coffee, dear? Amaya asked. You seem like you're in need of it. Being a medical student and considering the long day you've had, I'm sure you could do with some caffeine. Before Toya could even accept the offer, she was reaching for one of the cups and pouring the grounded coffee into a cup before getting the hot water. I hope you're alright with an instant take on Turkish coffee. It's all they'll allow me to do in the room. Oh, sure, thank you, Toya stammered, a little surprised at the woman's gentle insistence and how completely correct she was. He could do with coffee. Mum was a barista before she was admitted to hospital. That's her quirk, Saichi explained as his mother prepared the coffee. He had a knowing smile on his face. Morning brew. Anything coffee related, she's the best at. According to my dad and the entire police force, anyway. It's how I managed to woo your father, Amaya giggled, motioning for Toya to sit on a chair beside Saichi, which he did, and watched Amaya prepare the coffee for him, feeling a bit odd at having a patient serve him. Milk? No thanks, he smiled. Careful with the coffee sludge at the bottom. You don't want that grit in your mouth, Amaya added jokingly as she handed Toya the coffee. She watched as Toya took a sip of the intense black coffee, exactly to his taste, and giggled again as a young man's blue eyes sparkled at the perfect flavor. You seem like the black coffee type. My dad told me about the financial help he's getting from Endeavor. Saichi took Toya's attention away from the delicious drink. I'm not... he started, and Toya pondered for a second if Saichi felt insulted that his well-off father was financially aiding the Higawara family. I mean, I'm grateful. Oh, maybe not. At first I was a little frustrated, but Dad looked so happy and relieved at the help. It's helped him just as much as it has helped Mum. And you, Amaya added with a nod. Seriously, I couldn't believe what I had seen when I watched the sports festival. Again, Saichi looked away sheepishly, embarrassed. My husband was so busy working to support my medical needs that he neglected Saichi. No, sweetie, that is what happened, Amaya interrupted Saichi before he could defend his father. Sanjin shouldn't have listened to a literal child telling him it was okay to be left alone. Toya was sure Snatch got his own talking to. But I know he didn't mean to. It wouldn't have come this far if I was at home. Toya looked at Saichi, who had a guilty look on his face. Peripartum cardiomyopathy. That's what Snatch had said his wife's disorder was. And the cause... The doctor mentioned overseas options. Was he referring to the States? My father is very close to All Might, Toya asked before sipping at his coffee again. Amaya smiled and nodded. I don't understand how they haven't found any match for you in all these years, Saichi grumbled, looking upset with a furious scowl. Cultural beliefs, rare-type blood, and also stunted medical and technological development because of the appearance of quirks, Toya blurted out, before biting the inside of his mouth, feeling stupid. It was strong of him to info-dump, but unlike in his family, some topics were taboo for some. Sorry, I mean... You're completely right, Amaya nodded. Toya let out a sigh of relief through his teeth. There was actually a time we were looking into quirk usage to aid in the process and for my heart transplant surgery, but the medical board wouldn't allow it on the grounds of moral ethics. That, and we didn't find anything suitable anyway. Saichi let out a grumble. With your father's help, we've managed to get onto an organ transplant list in the United States. But the list is long, so it's just a question of patience and waiting. It's not fair, you've waited enough, Saichi argued, but his mother reached to lightly pinch his cheek. And I'll keep waiting, all in due time, she said with narrowed eyes and a bit of a pout. You're lucky I have to watch my heart rate. The telling off I would have given you if I weren't bedbound for what you said to that poor Natsuo boy. You'd be reliving it in your nightmares. Toya felt a shiver down his spine, but looking at Saichi's face, there was a small smile as he laughed sheepishly, looking fondly at his mother despite the sweetly uttered threat. Thank you for the coffee, Mrs. Higawara. I should get back to the office now. He smiled, and Saichi reached out for his empty cup, only the black sludge at the bottom remaining. I'll go with you to wash this, he said. With a goodbye and see you soon from Amaya, Toya and Saichi exited the room to walk down the hall together. The coffee cup Saichi was holding was one of the newer ones. Did you make those yourself? Toya asked, and a small flush appeared on Saichi's cheeks. Yeah, he muttered. My dad and I always go to a pottery to paint a cup for Mum's birthday. Toya smiled at that, endeared at his brother's former bully having such a soft side. I know of your mum's condition, he said softly after a moment. Saichi became very quiet as he looked to the floor. It's my fault, he muttered, sadness and bitterness clear in his tone. Peripartum cardiomyopathy. A rare disorder in which a pregnant woman's heart becomes weakened and enlarged. For Amaya to have such an extreme case and need a heart transplant, she must have had some sort of previous heart problem, one she was probably born with. It's not, Toya reassured, daring to reach out and place a hand on Saichi's head as the two stopped walking and looked to each other. I promise you it's not. He smiled. Saichi clearly disagreed. I made my mother's condition worse. I robbed her of her life, he argued, eyes shining with the start of tears. My parents were happy before me. Like yours is. That's one of the reasons I hated Natsuo. Toya felt his heart ache. My mum's scar, the one Saichi had used to torment Natsuo, was actually my fault. Saichi's eyes snapped up in surprise to Toya's half-littered blues, looking far away at a memory. I was angry and upset. I lost control of my flames while I was yelling at my baby brother. Mum pushed him out of the way and... He sighed in sharply. I hospitalized the both of us. His eyes refocused to Saichi's and his hand slipped from his head to hold him by the shoulder. Our situations are different, but I know what it feels like to feel at fault, and... He paused and smiled tensely to Saichi. Not feeling worthy of our parents' love. A beat passed, and he smiled. and yours love you so very much. So much so they had risked any complications to have him. Saichi took in a shaky breath, and his hold tightened around the cup. I'm so stupid, he muttered, embarrassed. Here he was, antagonizing Natsuo for half a school year based on assumptions of what he saw with his head lost in biased opinions, when he could have just spoken to him and his older brother. You really are, Toya teased, gaining a disgruntled look from Saichi. But that's okay. You're a kid and you're growing. We all do dumb shit. What's important is what you're gonna do about it. Natsuo had been down in the dumps ever since his father had yelled at him. It had been some days since, and while Enji wasn't mad at him anymore, Natsuo felt awkward and guilty every time the two were in the same vicinity. He knew it would pass eventually, as his grandfather kept reassuring him, but he still felt dumb. His friends had noticed his low mood, but being in the midst of schoolwork, internships, and tests, nobody, not even Natsuo, had the time to dwell on it. In fact, he was studying for English when his phone buzzed repeatedly, making him aware of a call. From Saichi. Saichi, what's up? Natsuo asked, leaning his elbows on his desk. He could take a break for his friend. Hey, Natsuo, Saichi stammered, not sure how to start. Your brother was at the hospital my mum's at today, shadowing a doctor, and we started talking and I... He paused as his nerves caught in his throat. I'm sorry for what I said and how I acted. Saichi blurted out finally, feeling the flush of humiliation creeping up his shoulders. And I'm thankful that, despite it all, we still became friends. Where's all this coming from? Natsuo laughed softly, leaning back against his chair. What did Toya say to you? He told me what happened with your mum and her scar. Silence. Toya's never told anybody outside of the family before, Natsuo said as he straightened his back. He paused, then snickered. Well, you now know even our family's a bit messed up. Saichi's weak snicker echoed from the other end of the phone. Do you think you, and any of the others, would want to do a study group in my mum's hospital room tomorrow? Saichi asked, sounding uncharacteristically shy. I'd like you all to meet her, and she'd enjoy the company. Natsuo smiled. That sounded perfect. I definitely would. Let's ask the others on the group chat. I know Yawara needs a distraction from her favorite idol being hospitalized, or she's never going to pass the tests. Both he and Saichi let out exasperated laughs. Rei couldn't help the smile of relief on her face as she accidentally overheard Natsuo. She had to trust her boy to get through this moment by his own volition, and it sounded like his friends would be there with him. Haru nervously tapped his fingers together as he looked up at the huge Endeavor agency. He sighed and walked into it, being greeted by a chorus of enthusiastic flaming sidekickers. Haru smiled and greeted everyone back, but walked non-stop to his son's office, being reassured by the sidekicks that he's indeed there. Haru only knocks a couple times before entering the office. Dad? Enji asked, confused at seeing his father come unannounced. He was at his desk, an open email from Sir Naitai's agency on his computer screen that he was in the middle of answering to. What are you doing here? I know, Haru stopped, a bit nervous. I know it's the middle of your workday, but, I just got out of my session with Dr. Tozura, and I wondered if we could talk? Enji gave his father a confused expression, but didn't say anything as he stood up from his desk and walked to the couches in the middle of his office, motioning to his father to sit on the one opposite him. Haru looked physically stiff, and like a lot was on his mind, which made Enji worry about how the session with Dr. Tsuzura went. He liked the woman a lot, had helped his family in so many ways, but if something had happened... What's this about? He asked, arms resting on his thighs as he looked to his father. How much do you remember of your childhood? Haru asked. Dad, Enji groaned, looking away with some annoyance. I'm not trying to psychoanalyze you. Haru hurriedly cut in before Enji could run away from the conversation. Sorry, I don't know how to word it any other way. I'm genuinely asking. Enji looked at his father again, identical blue eyes meeting. What do you remember of being a little kid? Enji scratched his neck below his ear, trying to recall any clear memories. How little? 6, 7 years old? Nothing. Oh. Harrow crossed his arms, a dejected look in his eyes. Well, what's your earliest memory? Something twitched in Enji's jaw. I don't think... Enji, please, Harrow pressed, knowing his son was going to avoid the question again. We've never talked about this properly before. We barely talk about the accident as is. You never ask about your mother, and you act as if nothing was ever wrong, when we both know I wasn't a good father for a very long time. That's not... Enji, Harrow said sternly. I'm asking you to tell me what you remember. Please. Enji stared at Harrow for a long second, before blinking rapidly and looking to the floor. I remember... a Saturday morning. I walked out of my bedroom and you were passed out at the coffee table. He started, voice low. You looked exhausted. There were sheets of paper everywhere. You had a lot of cups strewn about. I walked into the kitchen and the trash was full, so I took out the trash and cleaned up the cups. Harrow swallowed thickly. How old do you think you were? I don't know. Maybe 9 years old? Harrow shakily exhaled, rubbing the space under his eyes to massage away the tingling sensation of sadness starting. But that doesn't matter. Yes, it does. Enji shut his mouth at his father's interrupting reply. I know it seems silly to only be talking about this now in therapy, considering how long I've been doing it, but we started talking about you. And I remembered what... A smile pulled at his cheeks. What a goofy little toddler you were. Like pelting grapes at you. Like pelting grapes at me, Harrow said with a soft laugh. I know I've always said you never smiled or laughed, and that's true to a certain extent, but you used to be... He paused and rubbed his neck. I don't know. Free. Enji blinked. He didn't understand why this was important. As far as he was concerned, that was well over 40 years ago. What did it matter what things used to be like when that's not what they're like anymore? What his father was like before the accident wasn't the father he focused on. He had his reasons. What his father was like now, in front of him, breathing and alive without that internally exhausted look on his face, that's Enji's dad. Dad, I know you feel guilty for how things used to be. Not that Enji really remembered all that much. But I don't hold any of it against you. I know that as parents we never feel like we've done or are doing enough for our kids. But I, as an adult, am telling you that you are a great dad and a wonderful grandfather to the kids. Harrow believed that Enji was being honest, and he was glad that Enji believed what he said. But Harrow knew that there were unresolved things from their past that really should be addressed. But if Enji didn't remember, that made it more difficult. And concerning. Sure, it was decades ago, but for Enji to not remember anything at all was strange. You really wouldn't ever consider doing sessions with Dr. Tozuro? Harrow asked neatly with a sheepish expression. Don't you start too, Enji replied flatly. I've got enough of Toya nagging me. You'll tell me if you remember something, right? Sure. That's all Harrow could ask for at the moment. Chapter 62. Fluctuating. Compared to her brothers, Fuyumi was sure her days could be considered boringly normal. Now that she'd finally started teaching, the young woman fell into a regular routine. Get up early and have breakfast with her father, like she'd always done, before getting ready for the day and leaving the house with Harrow to get to their workplace together. They took the public transport to the area, like Harrow had done for years, and walked to the school, grabbing coffee on the way at a little shop owned by a lovely old lady who greeted both with sweet enthusiasm. Once they were in the building and staff room, they'd catch up on their colleagues and on any new announcements before going to their assigned classrooms and preparing for the students to come in. Fuyumi taught the first years, all 6-year-olds with various backgrounds, some having come straight from kindergarten and others not. There were many of them with completely different personalities and needs, which made class difficult to teach when a couple was so rowdy, but Fuyumi loved every second of it. Having 3 brothers and being the only girl had given her the patience of a saint and the tenacity of a bull. And the students were quick to learn that. Their teacher is a delightful, friendly woman, but the look she gave when they misbehaved, especially when it came to misusing their quirks, it was a look that could freeze hell itself. Some of the more rebellious 6-year-olds liked to take it as a challenge and test their boundaries. Books clattered to the ground as Fuyumi jumped upon hearing the sudden high-pitched scream at the back of the classroom, quickly followed by tearful wails. Abandoning the books on the floor she'd been giving out to the kids for today's class before it started, she rushed to the little girl to see what was wrong, but she needn't ask. Pink bubblegum was marred into her black fur, the little girl's quirk being a black bear heteromorph one, and it was sticking all her fine, thick fur into a painful clot. The girl sobbed. An accusatory finger pointed to her smug neighbour, another little girl with unkempt, bleached blonde hair. The obnoxious sound of bubblegum popping emitted from her mouth. Fuyumi ignored the blonde and kneeled beside the gum-covered victim instead. This irked the little blonde. "Are you alright?" A pointless question to ask, but Fuyumi wanted to know how hurt her student was. Her furred face was stained with a cascade of tears, little fanged teeth chewing at her trembling lip, and she shook her head. "Don't worry, I'll make it all better." "Do I have to cut my fur?" the girl sobbed. "Not at all. A little oil and some patience, and it'll slip right out." Fuyumi took the girl's clawed hand. "You have such lovely fur, it'd be a shame to cut it." At the compliment, the little bear girl sniffled, but smiled. The blonde grumbled, annoyed at being ignored. Fuyumi paid her no mind, and instead brought the other girl to her desk so she could do just as she said. This wasn't the first bubblegum incident. "Mr. Todoroki," she whined, kicking her feet. "Yes?" Fuyumi replied now that she was properly addressed, spritzing some hair oil onto the solidified gum. No answer. "Dear, could you pick up my books and give them out to the rest of the class?" "Why should I?" the blonde drooled. Fuyumi looked up from her important task to smile at the little girl. "Because I trust you to do a good job," she chimed, and returned to combing the gum out of the bear girl's fur. "This might hurt a little, I'm sorry." The warning was quickly followed by a sharp, "Ouch!" "You're being so brave. Just a little more patience, and there, it's out." Fuyumi showed her student the gum on the comb. "Your fur is very soft. You must take great care of it." "Mama brushes me every morning." The now happy girl bounced, joyful at having her fur back to its pristine state. "Thank you, Mr. Todoroki." "Mr. Todoroki." The teacher and student looked to the little blonde as she walked to them with crossed arms, pouting. "I gave out all the books." "That's wonderful, thank you." The grateful reply made the girl with unkempt hair blush. "Can you tell me why you put gum in your friend's hair?" With a shameful look to the floor, she shook her head and said nothing. "You have such a fun quirk. It's a shame to use it to ruin somebody else's looks." Fuyumi watched as the messy-haired girl shrunk in on herself, not as smug as she had been a minute ago. A gentle pull on Fuyumi's sleeve made her look down to her bear student, who pointed to the brushes on the desk. The bubblegum incidents weren't common, necessarily, but they couldn't be brushed off as accidents anymore. With an understanding smile, the teacher let her student pick a hairbrush and meekly approached her 6-year-old perpetrator. "Do you want to play hairdresser before class starts?" she offered, holding up the brush. "I have hair clips in my bag." Pride swelled in Fuyumi's chest upon seeing her two little students hold hands and return to their desks. The bear student dutifully and gently brushed through the bleached blonde hair, imitating Fuyumi's kindly actions. By the time class had started, Fuyumi had two very neat students at the back of her class, pink clips having been added to the now brushed blonde hair. Her smile was genuine. But the misuse of quirks and childish jealousy weren't the only issue in class. Energetic little boys hated to sit still and listen to their teacher drool on, especially when it was sunny outside, with a welcoming courtyard full of potential for fun. "Boys, settle down," Fuyumi asked firmly for the third time in a row when a group of boys refused to be quiet so she could teach basic math. They did not, in fact, settle down. Fuyumi sighed before getting an idea. "When is snack time?" "At 10, one boy yelled, very excited at the prospects of snack. "Good. What time is it now?" Fuyumi followed up, pointing to the clock. 8, miss," another boy replied. "Very good. So if it's now 8 and snack time is at 10, how many hours is that?" A wave of unsure murmurs washed over the crowd. After getting no answer for a couple seconds, Fuyumi turned back to the whiteboard and wrote numbers. 10 minus 8 is... Oh, 2! The first boy exclaimed instantly. 2 hours. Correct! Fumi cheered softly, clapping her hands at the boy who puffed his chest out in pride. In 2 hours, we'll all head outside and have snack time in the courtyard. How does that sound? The class cheered. Hara was happily surprised to see Fumi's class obediently sitting in the courtyard, basking in the sun as their teacher made sure everybody had their snacks. One little boy had forgotten his snacks at home, so Fumi pulled out her emergency apple juice and carrot sticks to give to him so he'd have something to munch with the others. Hey kids, Hara greeted as he strolled up to them, curious. Hello, Mr. Todoroki, they all said back, too focused on their snacks to really look at the PE teacher as he went to his granddaughter. Fun idea to bring them out here. It's a shame to be stuck inside when it's so nice. Hara praised the younger woman who beamed at him. I'm having this lot for PE after lunch, so we could eat together and discuss what we should do with them. Great idea! Fumi so loved working in the same building as her grandfather. It made every little obstacle that much easier knowing she had someone of more experience she could confide in. In turn, Hara could confide in her too. I tried suggesting therapy to your father, but, well, Hara paused, taking a bite of the pork Ray had packed for him and Fumi that morning. You know him. Fumi giggled. Therapy? Me? I'm a big masculine man. I don't need no therapy. The crude imitation of Enji made Hara choke out of laughter on his bite as Fumi stuck out her lower lip and chin in mock defiance, exaggeratingly frowning, sounding like a character from Toshinori's old movies, before she too burst into a fit of giggles. Yes, I know, and I agree, Dad should at least have one session. Even if not for his childhood, being a pro hero must come with some mental weight. A mouthful of sticky rice interrupted her for a moment. But if Toya can't get a dad to therapy, I don't think there's much any of us can do. Her grandfather couldn't argue that. Enji was wrapped around his children's little fingers, but not even the beloved eldest could budge the doting father. That afternoon, the gymnasium was a complete battlefield. The fatal game of dodgeball obliterating 6-year-olds left and right, colourful foam balls being pelted with no mercy as Hara watched on in amusement. Seemed Fumi had gotten a little of her brother's competitiveness, because she was not holding back against her students. And her students adored her for it. For every foam ball to the face, they picked themselves up and doubled their energy to take down their beautiful teacher. Hara was sure the parents would be very grateful for the good sleep their tired-out children would have that night. Yes, Fumi's days were mundane. No pro heroes or life-threatening villains, no deep ethical questions or medical morals to consider, no colourful suits or extensive quirk training. It was just home life, schoolwork, typical kid behaviour, and morning coffee. Completely, utterly mundane. And Fumi loved it that way. She loved being that little piece of normality in a family all about pro heroes, quirks, and what threat Endeavour faced today. Shoto was still homeschooled by Rei, but he was already well in the mindset of becoming a pro hero to follow in the footsteps of their beloved Uncle Toshinori. Natsuo was a licensed student hero, and Toya was researching quirks like a crazy scientist, not to mention always spending time at the agency. For research purposes. Not because he wanted to see Burnin. For sure. Fumi loved her silly little life, and bringing joy to these silly little kids and solving their silly little problems that were oh so very important to them. Even on tough days, she had Hara to back her up, and always looked forward to coming back into work. I'm sorry for putting gum in your hair. Thank you for brushing mine. It's okay, I'll brush it for you every day if you want. A teary-eyed single father holding his bleach blonde daughter's hand as a mama bear gave him hair care advice, their 2 little daughters the best of friends despite the morning kerfuffle. The word playdate even reached Fumi's ears. How was your day? A mother asks. I got a star in math, a very rambunctious little boy proudly announces, showing off his star sticker on his worksheet. His mother matched his energy. These moments made it all worth it to Fumi. Hara was happy to see his granddaughter thrive in her important teacher role. She was the first taste of school many of these children would have, and she took that responsibility with confidence, patience, and so much love, even in the moments she had to stare the children down to get them to listen. He loved their mundane routine. Getting coffee with Fuyumi in the morning was one of his favourite parts of the day, but journey back home with the chance for the two of them to catch up being a very close second. With the streets safe like they'd never been when Harrow was growing up and as a young adult, the ability to walk and talk without worrying about a random hit and run was such a wonderful luxury that Harrow fully welcomed. A normal life. Getting home, Fuyumi and Harrow saw Toya's shoes were already there. The only response to their "we're home" was Ray's "welcome back" from the kitchen, and the sound of the TV. It sounded like the news, a completely normal thing in this house. Probably something Endeavor and or All Might related, if Toya and Shoto were watching. "Hey boys, how's..." Harrow's voice hitched. Wide, blue eyes stared at the screen. A frantic hand was almost aggressively petting Harusume. Little paws flexed and relaxed on the Endeavor hoodie. A weak, unsure purr barely heard over the sounds coming from the TV. The middle schooler who cut a classmate, injuring him badly, is still on the run and the investigation in the case continues. Still on the run? When had this happened? Had he missed this on the news? The screen said, "Bloody tragedy at graduation." Was this back in March? April? He would have been in the middle of intense classes, but surely he would have caught wind of this. How long had this girl been on the run for? She had a straw in the blood in Saito's wound. "Toya, I don't want to watch this," Shoto said meekly. This grossed him out and made him feel itchy. Blood. She has a fascination with blood. Did that have to do with her quirk? Had she acted out before? It seems not. Everybody sounds shocked and terrified. She had a repulsive look on her face. Toya was shaking, and Fuyumi quickly trotted into the room to grab the remote. This wasn't going to do her brother any good, especially not with Shoto in the room. Maybe it was unfair of her to assume the worst, but she wasn't risking it. "She's a demon child," was the last line uttered from the speakers, by the girl's very own parents. Harrow felt nauseous just thinking about calling his own son such a horrid thing. Despite no more sound emitting from the TV and its now black screen, Toya was still shaking, staring like a madman at the abyss. His hair was on end, his shoulders shook. His grip on Harusume was getting so tight the cat made a little meow of discomfort. His stomach was turning. He was going to be sick. Cold sweat formed at his nape. "Toya?" Fuyumi's worriedly uttering of his name made Toya exhale through clenched teeth. "She's just a middle schooler." The words gurgled up his throat almost as fast as the bile did, and it was all Toya could do to throw Harusume off of his lap and slam the window open so violently it rattled to vomit out of it. Harusume hissed and scurried away at the abrupt movement, the sound echoing down to Ray. The wet sound of Toya retching did too. Chapter 63. Boiling. Toya was like a possessed man trying to find out what he could about the middle schooler named Himiko Toga. But at every turn he was being denied. The journalists who were keeping up with the investigation had nothing to offer him. What they told is all they knew. What police he'd managed to talk to themselves had no information he could use. He was directly denied access by medical staff, the middle school and the victim's family to try and speak to the boy Toga had injured. Toya understood he'd almost died, but how was he supposed to find and help Toga if nobody was willing to give him anything at all? Did her friends know her favourite places to go? Did she even have friends, or had she been a loner? Had she been a popular girl hiding a dark side, or had she just tried to fit in while rejecting aspects of her quirk? Was he overthinking it, and maybe it had nothing to do with her quirk? Maybe she was just crazy? No, Toya didn't believe that. He refused to believe that. No middle school girl stabs a boy with a box cutter and drinks his blood through a straw because she's just crazy. There had to be more to it. But nobody, absolutely nobody, was throwing him a crumb of anything. 2 days of non-stop nagging, investigation, and questioning resulted in nothing. It was infuriating. "Toya, please go to bed," Ray yawned as she found her eldest boy in the darkness of the kitchen, eyes wide and face pale as he scrolled and scrolled and scrolled through the internet, returning to those cursed forums to find even a rumour. "Toya." At the lack of answer, Ray's voice became firmer. That caught Toya's attention, wide blue eyes staring at the white-haired woman like he'd only just realised she was there. "Firecracker, go to bed. You have classes in the morning and you look terrible." "I can't, Mum. I just can't." Toya shook his head, hands shaking against the table. This girl is alone somewhere. I need to find her and figure out what happened, but nobody knows anything. The tremors got so intense his hands impulsively slammed the table, sending shocks up his arms. This was such a familiar scene to Ray. Her husband had said something almost identical many years ago. With the soft padding of bare feet against the floorboards, Ray reached for her eldest and wrapped her arms around his head, hugging her son against the stomach. I know, she soothed, running her fingers through his thick white hair, feeling her boy shake against her. From stress, exhaustion, or another emotion, she wasn't sure. But when he wrapped his own arms around her middle and pressed harder into her cool touch, she knew it was a mix of everything. Her strong boy with strong emotions. I know, it's hard, but you can't help anyone if you don't rest. I'll speak to your father tomorrow, figure something out while you're in classes. How does that sound? Wordlessly, Toya nodded against his petite mother and looked up at her with watery eyes, tiredness finally sweeping over him. Okay, thank you, Mum. His voice was shaky and quiet. Ray smiled and traced the dark circles forming under his eyelids with her cold thumbs. You're just like your father, she chuckled lightly and kissed her eldest baby's forehead lovingly. Something I so love about you. Toya snorted a laugh in reply. Even with his mother's promise to properly bring this up with his father, Toya was restless the entire day, and not just because of his shoddy sleep. That evening when he'd seen the news of Toga, his body's violent reaction sent his brain into overdrive, and it was without so much as an explanation that he'd disappeared for 2 days to track down the middle schooler, only returning home to sleep, if you could even call it that. Of course, his family checked up on him via text, but at the end of the day, he was a young adult. He could just leave for a couple days if he wanted, and nobody could really stop him. Any moment that wasn't looking for Toga made his knees jitter and his hands tremor. By some miracle, he pulled through the day and bolted out of the classroom and through town like a rabid greyhound towards his father's agency. There was no way in hell he could wait for him to come home. Angie watched his son heaving and panting, practically gagging as his lungs gave out from the effort to get to the agency as quickly as he could. Beside him was Takauchi, blinking in concern. Hi! Toya wheezed like a deflating balloon, shooting a very improper wave at his father and father's colleague. Hello, Candlelight, Angie returned, more proper. Your mother explained to me what you've been up to these last 2 days. I contacted Takauchi and he managed to get in touch with the girl's parents via the investigating policeman. Toya's head snapped up with big blue eyes. They've agreed to an interview with you. Toya inhaled an ecstatic gasp. But I have one condition. Toya deflated instantly. You have a condition, not the parents, Toya questioned, eyebrows furrowed. He wasn't panting as heavily. Angie grunted. I'll give you the address and agreed upon time, only if you take your grandfather with you. Deal, yeah, no, totally, absolutely, Grandpa can come with, that's fine. Toya's word vomit accompanied the eager nodding. He loves his grandfather, there wasn't any reason he couldn't join. Hara was far more wary about all this than Toya was. Ever since he'd heard how the parents had called their own teenage daughter a demon child, he disliked them just on that. There was no desire in him to meet them or hear their side of the story. What sort of parent calls their child something as horrendous as that? He understood why Enji wanted him to accompany Toya. Being along with those two wouldn't be a good idea for the young man's mental health. Hello? Mr. and Mrs. Toga, I'm Toy Todoroki, and this is my grandfather, Haro Todoroki. I believe my father and Detective Takauchi organized a meeting with you. Toya called through the gate intercom system. It was early evening, the remnants of the sun leaving a blood-red hue on the darkening sky, navy blue seeping into it. With an electrical buzz, the gate opened. Toya hurried inside while Haro dragged his feet. His eyes lingered on the vulgar graffiti freshly scribbled onto the gate walls. What sort of people say such things about a child? Himiko Toga's parents are ordinary and bland. Instantly, at Tara and Toya's entering of their home, their heads were on the ground, apologizing with shameful voices for what that girl had done. Such a horrible attack that even reached Endeavor's son. Toya felt his hands tingle. All he could see were his own parents having to do the same thing for something he did. Please get up, Hara asked firmly, not as stricken as Toya. We're not here about that. My grandson is a medical student specializing in quirks. He just wants to know more about Himiko. We tried all we could, sending her to quirk counseling, telling her to stop, but she just wouldn't. The mother practically sobbed, ashamed. Her obsession with blood just kept getting worse. Toya sat opposite the parents, while Harrow stood off to the side, arms crossed and uncomfortable. It's always quirk counseling. What is her quirk? Toya asked, trying to smile and be polite. Stay professional. Maybe if I knew the details, I could... Nothing good, the father interrupted sharply. It was like an elbow to the throat. They didn't even know what her quirk was. Something inhuman. Blue eyes unfocused. Silhouettes twisted and reformed in front of him, looking more like two familiar figures he loved dearly. Voices distorted into a deep, warm tone and a soft, cool one. But they said such horrible things. We tried ridding her of her erratic behavior, and he was such a cheerful and well-behaved boy. His mother's voice sobbed, ringing in his ears. It sounded so distant, like he was submerged underwater. But he did such abnormal things. He hurt that boy. He was born wrong. He's rotten to the core. Words were slurring and becoming indecipherable. Selected phrases were worming their way into his ears, nestling into his brain to leech off of his burning thoughts. Toya blinked rapidly, trying to refocus. He opened his mouth to say something. He was born broken. His eyes crossed and he slapped a hand over his mouth, doubling over. He was going to be sick again, was the panicked thought as he breathed heavily through his nose. The silhouettes of his parents lurched back. Did they think he was going to burn them again? He promised he wouldn't. He would never. He learned his lesson. Please don't look at him like that. Please, please don't. A warm hand is on his back, and another is laid over the hand covering his mouth. Hey, look at me. A kind, warm voice reaches out and gently picks out the leeching worms. It allows shaky blue eyes to blink the sickly tears away and look to equally blue eyes he'd inherited. You're okay. Is he okay? Is he, really? He's abnormal, erratic. What sort of humane sibling wants to burn his baby brother alive? Isn't he so broken that he almost killed his entire family by losing control of his flames? Didn't he make his dad cry? What good, loving child makes their dad cry? Let's go. You're not getting any answers from them. Hara pulled on Toya's jacket to make him stand. This had been a bad idea. He should have discouraged Enji from going along with this. Just because Toya is grown doesn't mean he's ready to face the underbelly of society. He's been protected from the true unkindness of the world, and right now, that world was spitting venom in his face. They clearly don't care about Himiko. We did everything we could for her! Her mother cried, insulted. You did everything you could for your appearances! Harrow snapped back, furious. You don't even know her quirk! You just shoved her into quirk counseling without even trying to understand her! She's erratic! The father yelled, getting agitated. She's a child! But Todoroki roared, forcefully dragging a shaking Toya to his feet. Your child! That you're supposed to love and treasure, even when life throws hurdles. That's what us parents are for! You don't know what we went through! Toya couldn't tell which of the parents were yelling. It sounded like a mix of 4 voices. I don't care! Harrow's firm teacher voice pushed back. Toya's put more effort in the last 2 days in finding and understanding the child you're supposed to love unconditionally than you've ever had in her entire life. There's more yelling, somebody is sobbing, and it's all a confused blur of noise and nausea bubbling for her stomach and sinus. Toya's seeing in double, triple, colours are melting together into a gross mismatching red and blue, dripping like tears or sweat or blood, a mix of all of them. 2 strong, grounding hands are still supporting him, pulling him out of the cursed house full of unrest. Toya, come on! Toya, let's go home. These people are a waste of time. Harrow snarled, not directed at the young man he was holding, but the tone itself made Toya stumble as they left the Toga household and slipped through the gates. They'd been in there for barely 10 minutes. How had it spiraled so quickly? Is this what Himiko went through every day? Toya had read articles and research papers about various parents and their effect on children. This had been a huge part of his research, but experiencing it firsthand, not even as the child of those parents, it had hit every insecurity and fear like a jackhammer. He couldn't even control where he was being taken, just guided by his grandfather down the road, away, far away from the restlessness of the building that was supposed to be a home. The road is dark. The red of the sky has melted with the blue into an eerie, star-spotted purple. Toya can't regulate his breathing anymore, but he doesn't want to be sick again. He inhales deeply with a starved gasp and starts violently hiccuping, his knees giving out underneath him. The only reason he doesn't crash his forehead against the concrete of the pavement is because of the warm hand against his chest, where his heart is. He wonders if he can feel his heart beating violently. It feels like it's going to explode, be completely engulfed by anguished emotions. Toya. The gentle utterance of his name makes him look up, whole body trembling like a newborn lamb. Let's go home. Home. Right, home. He has a home. Toya has a place he can call home. That house he just left wasn't his home. It wasn't even Himiko Toga's home. It was a home to no one. And Toya has a home. How did it go? His home greets him as soon as he's through the threshold. His heart explodes in his ribcage and he throws himself into his father's chest. His home. Without even considering what's happening, his father's arms are wrapping around Toya's frame just as the tears start to fall. Always the annoying tears. Toya bursts into broken, heaving sobs, crying like he hadn't done in years, not since waking up at the hospital. His hands claw at his father's shirt like he's terrified he'll disappear as quickly as a flame in the wind. Terrified that this is all just a trick of his messed up, frazzled brain, overwhelmed by emotions he never seems to be able to control. He never understands why he has so many, and where they come from. A hand is on his head, another around his shoulders, and he feels his father leaning forward, holding him like he was the little kid that he'd found on Sekoto Peak again. Interrupted words, painful hiccups, and sharp sniffles babbled through the hallway, Toya completely unable to collect himself. Enji just holds him, confused but present, and strokes his son's hair with his thumb, letting him cry. His confused look to his own father is met with an anger-fueled sadness in the older man's eyes as Harrow stood by the closed door. Fat, painful tears run down Toya's cheeks, wetting his hair and the front of his father's shirt. He swallows, wanting to talk and express what he was feeling and thinking, but it was so hard when his own throat and lungs were choking him. "Thank you," he gasps out, voice trembling and bordering on hyperventilating, "for never giving up on me." Through the stuttering, the sobs and hiccups, Enji caught the words. "Never, I would never," he reassures, bringing his eldest son he loved tighter into his arms. Despite being a young man, he was still so small to Enji. Forever his little son. "I will never. Nor your mother, nor your grandfather, nor anyone else." Toya sniffed and hiccuped, shuddering with intense emotion. But the natural warmth from his father's hands soothed the tremors away. They were joined by a third, Harrow's, resting on the middle of his back. They'd explain everything later. Toya wouldn't sleep well tonight. Natsu and him would talk well into the early hours about Himiko. Enji would relay his son's worries to Takauchi. But for now, I'm home. Welcome home, Candlelight. He's home. Chapter 64. Claggy. There was nothing more he could do currently with the Himiko Toga situation. So, with a heavy heart and guilt-filled sense of failure, Toya continued to live. He had essays to write, classes to attend, and work experience to tick off. Putting his life on pause simply wasn't an option. Even with the promise from Detective Takauchi that he would update Toya if anything progressed in the investigation, a dark, gloomy cloud hung over the young man's head, his doomed expression so visible that it even made Dr. Ujiko shoot him a concerned look as he crawled into the children's clinic. Of course, he knew why he was in such a state, but actually seeing that usually peppy eldest Todoroki child look so defeated was off-putting. "Todoroki, what's wrong?" he asked, feigning ignorance, but his concern was genuine. They couldn't have such a potentially useful asset to give up when the point was to make him join their side. With unenthused and slurred words, Toya retold his misadventure with the Toga case, voice tight like he'd cry again. Vulnerability. "Unfortunately, such things are extremely common. What with quirks becoming more and more complex and people's inability to accept change, there's no doubt here society will become marred with misunderstood quirks turning people into villains." Toya's lower lip trembled, and it was all he could do to inhale shakily. That's not word for word what he'd personally gone through, but it was close enough to feel like he'd been the one stabbed with a box cutter. "Doctor," he murmured, looking at the older man with watery eyes that imitated broken glass. "Is that truly unavoidable? Don't..." Tomura's anger and spat out words flashed in his mind. "Don't you think it's possible to prevent these situations?" Cracks were forming. Toya's first real experience of the dirty underbelly of Hero Society's rejections of the outcasts, and already he was splintering. Too sweet, too soft, and too emotional, a bleeding heart that would cry blood on behalf of others. It was honestly pathetic, but useful. All he needed was a little push and guidance, and he'd walk into All for One's arms. The doctor was sure of it. What did that naive Tomura know? Anybody could be correctly influenced onto the necessary path for the Demon Lord. Garaki would show that brat so. I wish for them to be prevented. He sighed with melancholy, and a caring pat to Toya's arm, the two leaving the office to face the patients. But people are unwilling to change. Burning to death would have been kinder than hearing those words from the man he held at such high esteem. The shorter man had researched quirks and their related topics for years. For him to say that it was impossible for situations like Himeka Toga to be prevented, that Toya's ambitions were null and void, it made something broken and bitter wind around his heart. Before the conversation could continue, a nurse handed Toya a clipboard with his one meeting of the day. Right. Work experience. Be professional. Because that had worked great the last 2 times he was supposed to be professional. He shot his peer a sad, broken glance, and made his way to the appointed room like a kicked and beaten dog, metaphorical tail between his legs. Surely, this would lure Toya to see things as they did. Togari was far too close to Toga for the young man's liking, and dealing with verbal abuse from the angry father and former bully of his sounded like torture when all he wanted to do was curl under the covers of his futon at home with Harusame blotted against his chest and give up. Nobody ever said he wouldn't give up on himself, and he was one insult away from collapsing under the weight of his shortcomings. At the door, a deep inhale was all the preparation he could afford before he entered and opened his mouth to greet the dislikable Ayata and his sweet little girl. His mouth stayed opened, eyes widened. "Dr. Todoroki!" Koba greeted with a bright, happy cry, running to hug his knee as she grinned up at him with the cutest smile the world had ever seen. "Hi!" "Hi," Toya replied, automatically, stunned. This wasn't real. It had to be a cruel, gross joke from the universe. A hopeful, naive dream that he'd wake up from to return to the nightmarish reality where little Koba believed her parents hated her for something out of her control. But it couldn't be a dream, because the little girl was hugging his knee, smiling brightly as she hopped on her toes, delighted to see the friendly doctor. Please don't let this be just a dream. "How are you doing?" "Great," she chimed, throwing her arms up. An oversized black shirt with fiery explosion designs, red and orange, along the sleeves and collar, covered her red shorts. Small spiked bracelets adorned her wrists, and more importantly, her brown soft hair was pulled back into a ponytail, held by another spiked strand of leather. "Look at you, a little punk in training," Toya forced through the choking in his throat, grinning splitting his face as he joked. Blue eyes lifted and met with a sheepishly smiling, freckled face. "I see where she gets it from." Ayata was wearing a black leather jacket, silver studs and loops decorating it, as well as black leather pants and boots. His earrings had changed from the previous black piercings, and now had a small, hedgehog-shaped jewel dangling from a fine chain that connected from his earlobe to his upper ear. With his hands in his jacket pockets and an awkward smile on his face, he looked relaxed. "Daddy motorcycled here!" Koba expressed excitedly, tripping over her syllables as she bounced, a giggling mess. "We're going to a concert!" "I'm taking her to my band practice," Ayata corrected hurriedly. He wasn't taking his tiny daughter to a hard rock concert. Not yet, at least. He seemed a bit embarrassed to admit that. "You're in a band?" Toya's awed voice made Ayata glance away, cheeks burning. "Therapist said I needed a hobby. Apparently, working myself into an early grave isn't healthy. Who would have thought?" He joked with a tight voice. "I reconnected with some high school friends. They needed a bass guitarist." "Therapist?" Ayata went to Dr. Tezura. "You took my advice," Toya breathed out. The raised eyebrow he got from his old bully made him flush when he realized he'd said his thoughts out loud. "What else was I going to do?" Ayata shrugged, and smiled to Koba, who was rocking on her soles, having fun with the simple movement. "It was for Koba's sake. My wife is going too." "Mama's hair is violet!" Koba interjected happily, beaming. "Her hair is violet." Her father's soft confirmation made her giggle as she spun on the spot. Toy was doing everything in his power to keep the tears at bay, looking comically stiff as he stood there with a crooked, trembling smile. "Koba, you want to give it to him now?"
"Oh, yeah!"
The little girl skipped to her dad as he pulled something out of his pocket. Koba took it and ran to Toya, offering it up to him with two hands like an important document.
"Thank you for helping us!"
His knees gave out, but he covered his trembling bones by crouching in front of Koba to properly accept the serious offering, which was a homemade thank you card with a little hedgehog drawn on the cover. Toya opened it, and in crooked but legible writing was Koba's thank you, as well as from her parents in neater writing on the inner left page. What caught Toya's attention the most was a very familiar red and blue uniform surrounded by fire drawn on the remaining inner page, and the young man laughed. "Is that Endeavor?" He grinned, emotional tears turning to ones of barely kept in laughter.
"As a hedgehog,"
Koba declared proudly. Behind her, Ayata looked flustered, unsure if this would be considered insulting or not to Toya. He knew Endeavor was his favorite hero in elementary school, but he couldn't know if that had changed. "I love it, thank you," Toya smiled, and pet Koba on the head kindly. Her hair was soft to the touch. "I'm really happy you're doing better." Koba beamed up at him toothily, freckled face warm and happy. "Toya." Ayata caught his attention, and Toya looked up. The brunette was rubbing his neck and looking ashamed in a way Toya knew the feeling of far too well. He stood. "I'm sorry for bullying you. I was insecure because of my quirk and projected that onto you. It was cruel, and I'm sorry. I know nothing could make up for the things I said." Ayata bowed before the frozen Toya, staring at his old bully like he'd grown a second head. "Despite that, you helped my family anyway, and I'm grateful. Thank you." Nobody had ever apologized for bullying him. He'd grown to never expect an apology. Now being faced with one, Toya had no idea what to say or how to react. Every thought and emotion of the last few days, years even, bounces around in his head, and he can't make sense of it. His eyes dropped to the card he's holding, looking at Koba's wobbly kanji contrasting with her parents' stylized handwriting, and at the Endeavor hedgehog. Toya stammered, hands shaking a little before he recollected himself and swallowed. "Thank you." The words were uttered out slowly. Ayata straightened his back to look at his old schoolmate, the two young men standing face to face. "For the apology, but also for listening to me." Ayata smiled shyly and picked up an excited Koba. "You're already a great doctor, Toya," the father said softly. "What you said, I needed to hear it." A nod is all Toya could give. Anything more, and he'd burst into tears again. With trembling fingers, Toya dialed Dr. Tozura's number. He was due for a session with her tomorrow, the earliest meeting they could schedule, but he needed to speak to her now, just for a couple minutes. "Toya, how are you?" The woman's kind voice brought ease into Toya's palpitating heart. "Good. I'm good," he breathed out, before smiling despite himself. There were no tears in his eyes, but the emotions were jumping like happy, flickering flames in his chest. Really good. That's not at all what eavesdropping Garaki wanted to hear. He was supposed to be on the verge of giving up, emotionally vulnerable and willing to turn his back onto the society he realized would never change. He was supposed to come to terms that destroying Hero Society was the only way to fix it. He wasn't supposed to be feeling good with a relieved, relaxed smile while speaking to his therapist. "I'm so glad," Tozura sighed, relieved. "You can tell me all about it in detail tomorrow, but what changed between yesterday and today?" She'd heard his blubbering, hiccuping voice yesterday, still whimpering from his tears as he begged for a session, his father talking to his mother in the background about why their eldest son was so broken-hearted. Compared to now, he sounded peaceful in a reassuring way. Toya's eyes scanned the clipboard he was holding, back leaning against the clinic wall. The Togari family wouldn't need another checkup. They had the ways to help, really help, their little Koba with her quirk. She wants to be a rock star and ride motorbikes and get a piercing, just like her daddy and mummy. Apparently her mother is a bit of a metalhead herself. A smile pulls on his lips and he leans his head back, closing his eyes. It's possible. He can do it. Even if it was just one family, it proves to him that it can happen. I was able to help. He's not giving up on himself. Chapter 65. Damp. The entirety of Naruhata is drowned in all-encompassing darkness as the power goes out. Tensei, after his failed attempt to apprehend Koichi by working with the police, deduces this can't be a coincidence. It has to be connected in some way to the vigilante. What sort of danger he's gotten himself into to the point they have to lock down and evacuate Naruhata, Tensei was starting to think it was a lot bigger than the police had originally figured out. That's why backup had to be called for. Already on the scene was Best Jeanist, Edgeshot, Eraserhead, and somewhere in the pitch black, Frostbite, who had been called in to help by Ingenium personally and had tagged along with his former teacher. Initially, his duty was to observe and help corner the crawler if necessary, but with Naruhata had plunged into the dark, that shifted things drastically. "Frostbite! Follow Eraserhead!" Natsuo heard Tensei order for his earpiece, so Natsuo obeyed. Using his eyes to skate across the town and keep up with his old teacher swinging among the buildings to take down the crawler, the teen's eyes adjusted to the dark. Thus, he saw Koichi cutting the chase short to save a woman from her crashing scooter. Always the do-gooder. "Whoa, Natsuo, you're here too," Koichi commented with lazy surprise as Frostbite skidded to a stop beside his former teacher. "You two know each other?" The black-haired man asked suspiciously, as if he didn't have an extensive history of Koichi. Hands in his pockets. Natsuo gave him a nervous grin. With the blackout going on for kilometers and the railways being shut down, it was clear something nefarious was going on. Natsuo, despite being a licensed hero, was still only a student and not as well versed in all that was going on, unlike Best Jeanist, who compared this situation to the Sky Egg incident, which was vaguely familiar. He heard his dad grumbling about it at some point. "Thanks for being here, heroes," Koichi declared confidently as he entered the room they were all discussing what to do next in. The vigilante was just done reassuring the citizens with Eraserhead and telling them to find shelter in the buildings. "Please take care of Naruhata." Awkward silence stretched out between the pro-heroes and the vigilante. "On that note, I'm out," Koichi added with meek laughter. "So good luck with all this." But of course, he's still a wanted man, and it was with a gurgled cry that Aizawa's bindings wrapped around him to keep him in place. "Crawler, as of now, you are a villain in custody," Best Jeanist reminded. "We cannot release you. But why didn't you flee when you had the chance?" Edgeshot queried with a raised eyebrow. "'Cause, well," Koichi, with Aizawa's scarf wrapped around his middle, scratched the back of his hair. "You guys are working hard for this town. The least I could do was show up to say thanks." Natsuo almost started laughing in disbelief. Koichi couldn't be real. How could someone this aloof and genuine be a wanted vigilante with someone intent on putting him in danger? It was unbelievable. Considering the circumstances, Aizawa took charge of Crawler, a silent agreement with everyone for them to all work together until this situation was sorted out. The two headed to the hospital where Koichi's friend was still recovering, Kazuho Hanayama, Natsuo believed her name was, while the other pro-heroes came up with a plan. The strange moment of tense peace was incredibly short-lived as distant explosions were heard, the windows of the buildings shaking a little at the intensity of the blast despite clearly not being particularly near to them. Frostbite looked to Ingenium, concern in his eyes hidden by his goggles, but the older man could tell that the student was feeling wary at this development. More than anything, Natsuo was getting antsy with doing nothing and just talking. He wanted to go out there and help. He was understanding his father more and more. The explosions only got worse, more frequent yet more distant, and that stressed the teen out even more. He couldn't take it. "I'm going ahead and seeing if Mr. Aizawa and Koichi are alright," Frostbite said. He was worried that things had gotten sour on the way and at the hospital. Tensei opened his mouth to say something, but was interrupted by the younger man. "Ingenium, do I have your permission to go?" Tensei stared and considered what he'd say to his own little brother if asked. He smiled. Frostbite dashed down the main street. He had no idea which direction specifically Aizawa had gone, so he just made for the hospital in general, hoping to catch something of interest on the way. His body was low, moving swiftly with rapid grace, leaving a trail of thin, quickly melting ice behind, damp spots on the ground being the only indication the ice hero had just been there. A turn, another turn, and Frostbite slid sharply to a sudden stop, face to face with a questionably dressed group of dark figures, all of whom had a strange scar across their faces. Expecting a fight, Natsu got into position to get away, but rather the strange beings ran in the opposite direction, in sync, like a hive mind listening to an order. They were definitely heading towards Koichi, no doubt about that. His father's words rang in his ears. Whoever it was who had it for him, they were dangerous. Natsu really shouldn't mess with that if he didn't have to. There were other pro-heroes with more experience, the police even, actual adults that could do what he was dying to do. Natsu shouldn't be putting himself in danger. But Frostbite is a rescue hero. Pushing with his hands off the ground, he skated forward at a breakneck speed. Ingenium's training and Koichi's advice could be put to the test, Natsu thought to convince himself. Where would Koichi be right now? Staying low on the ground with so many of these bomber villains coming after him would be incredibly foolish. He had to be up in the sky somewhere. Think ahead, look ahead, be prepared. What's the next move? One explosion in the distance made Frostbite take a sharp left through an alleyway. Up, with the night sky in the background, he saw the familiar silhouette of an All Might hoodie, the ear-like shapes flapping in the cold wind. Either that was Shoto being utterly insane, or that was Koichi.
Wow, what's the crawler up to?
Citizens, outside, exposed and in danger of being caught in the explosions directed at Koichi.
Watch out!
The vigilante's cry boosted Frostbite into action. Before the former could use his body and quirk to shield the two civilians, the UA student summoned a wall of ice to protect all three. It cracked under the impact of the bomber villain, but otherwise stayed standing. Second year had done marvels in Natsuo's already bruised body and quirk.
Ah, Natsuo!
Go! Frostbite ordered.
They're after you! Keep going!
The speedy vigilante didn't need to be told twice. In the blink of an eye, he and his pursuers were gone. Are you alright? Please, go find shelter. Frostbite checked on the two frazzled civilians.
Is he okay? He looks exhausted,
one exclaimed, worried about the crawler.
If you hadn't blocked that explosion...
I'm going to catch up to him and make sure he's okay, but please worry about your own safety first and foremost, Frostbite said, smiling at them kindly. The two adults nodded and hurried off the street. A trail of explosions were Frostbite's breadcrumbs towards Koichi. Vigilante or no, he was a good guy with a heart of gold. Why would anyone be so intent on killing the guy? It was like wanting to kick a puppy because it's too cute, or slapping a child for doing a good job. It's completely irrational. Things only went from bad to worse, a gunshot. Several more worsening explosions, the bomber villains crowding all together like a twisted pyramid. Blinding hot light, the whip and crackling of lightning bursting and throwing Natsuo off balance. Too much was happening all at once. The student's mind was racing faster than his eyes could generate. He couldn't make sense or nonsense of what he was seeing and sensing. Every nerve was jittering, every hair was on edge, the air becoming thin, and Natsuo found it hard to breathe. His eyes squinted at the towering, monstrous fanged creature made of pure energy, like flickering flames of electricity, burning powerfully that it made Natsuo sweat even from a distance. It was targeting something, or rather, someone. What on earth had Koichi gotten himself into? This was insanity. How was Natsuo ever supposed to know what to do in such a situation? In what reality would UA ever be able to prepare him for something as outlandish as a giant made of fiery energy? He was frozen in time, feet unable to move as he stared at the creature causing destruction. What on earth could he even do? He isn't strong enough. Grey-brown eyes caught the flapping silhouette of an All Might hoodie. Stop thinking. Just do. Do something. Anything. The falling figure is beaten, bleeding, bruised and bruising, but still fighting and trying to keep going. There's no other hero on the scene, it's only Koichi. And yet, even though his body feels like it's going to die, even though it feels like today might be the end, he's having so much fun. He's taken a point-blank hit from the fiery kaiju-looking beast. His leg is mangled, and yet he's still standing before it, smiling like an idiot. Another blast is being shot his way. All he can do is raise his hands to use his quirk to protect himself. It's instinctive at this point. He's put all his hope in the heroes, because really, what else can he do at this point? Koichi expects flesh-ripping heat to blast him away. Freezing cold and wind whipping through his blood and sweat-matted hair greets him instead. There's a hand on his neck and another around his waist. His body is low to the ground.
Don't just stand there and take it!
The shout is familiar. It sounds like Endeavor. What are you doing? Blood splatters from Koichi's mouth. He's missing a tooth. Playing hero? The raging beast roars. It attacks, but Frostbite is faster. That's hardly fair. Having allies? Number 6 didn't have any allies. 2 little kids against 1 isn't fair. The boy in the All Might hoodie and the one who looks like Endeavor are laughing together, faster than little number 6, shapeless with a scarred face, leaving him behind and alone. The roar is shrill like a child having a tantrum.
This isn't the time to be frolicking!
Natsuo yells at Koichi as he zigzags away from the attacks, one blow after another.
We need to buy time for the pro heroes to get here!
Koichi is gagging, the taste of his own blood in his mouth making him choke. Aren't you a pro hero?
I'm a child!
Natsuo's panicked yell as he dodges yet another fatal attack would make Koichi laugh if he had the lung capacity right now. Number 6 is indeed having a tantrum. That's quite clear to see. Frostbite is ruining his fun, taking his play buddy's attention away from him. The Todoroki child is stagnating the two's progress, cutting their fun time short by rescuing the vigilante instead of letting him body all the blows. All for One smirks at the scenery. Curious? Curious. The fiery beast cries out a strangled, furious roar, and Natsuo is blinded by light. He can't see where he's going. He stops suddenly, body spinning to face the threatening fires, and summons as much ice as he can muster. It covers the surrounding streets, the buildings. A wall hides him from the beast's view, the delicate shine of frost covering both his and Koichi's shapes, and acting like a mirror to blind the beast in return. Give it a taste of its own medicine, Natsuo spits venomously, dashing into a dark alleyway as the beast cries due to its own confusion. We have no time, Natsuo pants, feeling his heart trying to rip out of his throat. Koichi, you need to go airborne again. There's too many people in the streets. Despite the kaiju creature, people are spilling out of the buildings, cheering for their illegal hero. Koichi hears his various friends' voices, encouraging him all the while trying to help the reckless citizens shouting their support for him to evacuate. I can do that, Koichi wheezes. His body is trembling, but he's not worse off thanks to Natsuo's impromptu saving. He could rest his quirk for a couple moments and get his bearings again. Up in the sky, the voice of a woman coming from a helicopter can be heard, telling people to evacuate. The airborne vehicle catches the beast's attention, and it reacts. Oh no! There isn't enough time for either Koichi or Frostbite to save the attacked citizens, now falling from the sky.
It's fine!
Frostbite yells, dragging Koichi by the back of his shirt to get moving. Koichi's arguing is interrupted by the pro heroes finally arriving at the scene. Best Genius saves the falling citizens. Edshot is reporting on the beast's movements, and Ingenium is helping with the evacuation. President Mike and Mr. Blaster are also airborne to help. Frostbite is right. It's fine. He can trust in the heroes to do their jobs.
Mr. Aizawa!
Natsuo yells, seeing the black-haired man come into view. He can't call him by his hero name. That's still his teacher, in Natsuo's mind.
Here!
With the strength and audacity only Endeavor-san could have, Natsuo throws Koichi at the pro hero like he's in the Olympics for the discus throw. Koichi doesn't have time to do much else but laugh in panic as Aizawa's scarf wraps around him. The cheering, the camaraderie, the smiles, the encouragement, they're all for Koichi. None of them are for him. His dream, everything he wanted for himself, all that he wanted to become, it's all happening for Koichi. The monster cries a mournful, bone-chilling shriek. It bubbles and splits apart. Dozens of the mini beasts scatter and instantly start exploding. The widespread damage is instantaneous, civilians, police, and pro heroes in danger alike. Nobody knows what to do. It's like headless chickens running around and into each other. Even the specialized Buster Union can't do anything against this swarm of exploding bodies. A plane flies overhead.
It's time for Endeavor to take charge here.
Natsuo thought he was going to cry when he heard his father's voice ring out through the sky. He'll take any verbal lashings as long as it meant today would be over and done with already. Not that he did anything wrong. Ingenium had given him permission. He was definitely throwing Tensei under the bus with this one. Endeavor! Burden yells. They're both free-falling towards Naruhata, the chaos visible from the bird's eye view. It's still a chaotic mess down there. We can't attack yet. No matter what happens, if Endeavor caused more destruction to stop the villains, he'd take full responsibility. Don't worry, Burnin, he says, intense wind blowing through his flames and hair as the cityscape rapidly gets closer. We're about to roast a gang of villains, all while minimizing the damage. Mid-air he stops, fire roaring around his boots and arms. Any second, a glint in the sky, and gold, blue, and red fly past him, extinguishing some of his flames on the way as the huge body crashes into the street. At last, Takauchi can finally breathe. Have, smash. No, smash. Fear, smash. I, smash, smash, smash. I'm here! Only All Might could have the strength, speed, and stamina to blast every single last one of the exploding villains straight into the air. Up high, above the cityscape, all perfectly lined up for Endeavor, much like a swarm of bees trapped in an enclosed alleyway. Flash fire fist, prominence burn. Powerful orange flames tore up the night sky. In a blinding flash, all the small versions of the fiery kaiju explode in the controlled safety of the empty sky and Endeavor's powerful quirk. As quickly as it had started, it's over. Natsuo resists collapsing to the ground. There's still work to do. All the pro-heroes, police, and first responders are quickly on the scene, not wasting time on catching their breath when they're citizens to group up and check for injuries. One child cries as he's reunited with his parents. President Mike is keeping everybody up to date with what's happening, and some of the locals, who Endeavor is convinced are the Crawler's friends, are volunteering to help with recovery. Natsuo has whiplash from the change in pace. He just sort of stands there, lingering between Ingenium and his sidekicks, none too sure what to do now. Nobody's giving him any orders, and his brain is a mushy mess of emotions. He's not hurt. Some of the fluff of his hero suit a bit singed at worse. Frostbite. His father's stern voice is like a fluffy blanket being wrapped around him. Natsuo visibly relaxes as he steps away from the other heroes to meet his father, whose own sidekicks are getting busy sorting things out. Are you alright? I'm being told you were in the middle of the chaos. Ingenium said I could be. Natsuo blurts out with an accusatory finger towards the man. Endeavor shoots a look at his youngest son's childhood friend's older brother, and Ingenium shoots him a bright, albeit tad nervous grin before quickly disappearing into the crowd to help with various duties. It's not a reproach, Enji reassured, placing a hand on his son's shoulder and squeezing it softly. Are you alright? The question is asked again, and Natsuo stammers. Yes, he finally utters out, unsure and confused. Everything happened so fast. I froze. And then I didn't, and I saved Koichi, and we were avoiding the beast, and then... He exhales and swallows. And then it was over. It was mental whiplash. Enji's throat tightened at hearing Natsuo freezing. Didn't he know that feeling all too well? Go find your uncle. He should be around here somewhere. I don't want him straining himself. Enji instructed his son. Uncle. Find his uncle. Yeah, he can do that. Natsuo loves Uncle Toshi. He can find him. And he does, easily, looking scrawny and exhausted with blood dripping from the corner of his mouth. It's all Natsuo can do to wrap a large, light blanket around him. You did good out there, kiddo. Toshinori's skeletal face grins at him, looking exhausted. Natsuo inhales sharply. He doesn't know what to say. But his uncle knows what he's thinking. It gets easier over time, I promise. A scrawny hand pats the white strands of hair in a comforting manner, and Natsuo closes his eyes. He did good. Yeah, he can believe those words. He did good today. Chapter 66. Thermal. With much reluctance and avoiding his son's request, something he only managed to do for about a month after the Naruhata lockdown, Enji relented with a grumble and agreed to accompany Natsuo to the hospital that Koichi was recovering in. Things having settled and being rebuilt with no civilian casualties, there was no reason why Natsuo couldn't visit Koichi. Enji was just incredibly salty that the kid was getting away scot-free by becoming a sidekick to Captain Celebrity. Enji mentally gagged just thinking of that name. In America. It was ridiculous that the law-breaking vigilante, who had put his entire town in danger by messing with things he couldn't deal with, wasn't going to be facing any repercussions. Not to mention, Natsuo had to save him. And well, yes, that is his job as a pro-hero, but still Enji's baby boy. He found some relief to that saltiness when upon entering Koichi's hospital room, the young man visibly jumped and squeaked at the number 2's intensity. "Hey, Koichi." Natsuo waved from behind his father as he nudged the taller man to go in already and stop hogging the door space. Enji moved to the side of a hummed-out grunt. "How you doing?" "I'm alive," the former vigilante smiled, eyes warily glancing to Endeavor, who, despite being in civilian clothes, was still intimidating. "For now," Enji grunted. "How are all your friends?" Natsuo's expression was a bit meek considering his father was hovering over his shoulder, as if he was looking for any reason to throw Koichi out the window. "Recovering all right." "Pop's awake," Koichi smiled brightly. "The others are all okay too, so all's well." Again, his eyes shot to Endeavor before softening to Natsuo in that goofy, laid-back way he had. "Thanks for saving me. I could have ended up in way worse shape if not for you." "You have a mangled leg, a tooth knocked out, and I don't even want to know how many cuts and bruises." Natsuo's flat reply gained a laugh from Koichi. "I heard that you're becoming a sidekick in the States." "Yeah, Captain Celebrity really looked out for me there." Koichi jumped out of his skin at Endeavor's angry exhale, like a bull about to barge into a china shop. "I know that I, caused you trouble, Endeavor, sir." "Do you now?" Endeavor hissed through gritted teeth, eyes narrowed on the vigilante that, while not in his territory and thus not his priority, had slipped through pro-hero's fingers for quite some time. "What about all the trouble you caused Detective Takauchi?" Him too." Sweat was running from Koichi's temples, but he still had that dumb smile on. "I am sorry. I can't help it." "I can tell," Enji snarled without heat. Koichi's blank frog blink told he didn't get what Endeavor was saying, despite being dressed in yet another All Might hoodie. "You'll be getting no thanks from me for what good you have done. You got my child involved, riled up a dangerous villain, and broke several laws." "I wasn't that involved," Natsuo muttered. Koichi just laughing meekly, like the plain, regular guy he is. The black-haired man blinked when Natsuo pulled out his phone and showed him unblocking Koichi's number. "We'll stay in touch, okay? We're both going to be pros now." Koichi's smile brightened. "Okay, come visit me in the States someday." "I definitely will." A strange flush appeared on Koichi's cheeks, suddenly not meeting Natsuo's eyes, muttering something under his breath. A snort escaped Natsuo as he bit the inside of his cheek and looked to his father. Enji's eye twitched. "Thank you, Endeavor!" Koichi chirped as his regained friend and former persecutor left his hospital room. The former vigilante's voice was far too bright and chipper for what the towering man wanted it to be, mood completely uplifting by getting a reluctant signature from the number 2 hero, his stylized kanji stiffly but professionally written over the ripped-out page of his coffee commercial. Natsuo was sure Koichi was going to frame it and place it beside Frostbite's signed commercial as well. Whatever. If Koichi was going to make a change for the better and work hard as a pro hero in the States, then Endeavor would respect and accept that, once he got over how salty he felt. "Endeavor! Frostbite!" Of course, they were ambushed by journalists as soon as they stepped into the lobby to leave. "May we please ask some questions?" Enji's blue eyes looked down to his teen son, almost reaching his shoulders now, and Natsuo grinned. At the number 2 hero's grunt and nod, the questions started. The typical mundane stuff. What do we know about the villain? How is the crawler? How did you feel in the moment? What are the steps forward? Endeavor and Frostbite had little to do with the overall situation, redirecting to whatever answers the police had given in the last month when it came to questions about the lockdown. Anything to do with them directly, they answered honestly but simply, not offering any flowery speech about the importance of being a hero at the right time in the right place, or whatever the types of All Might would say. "Frostbite, you were right in the center of the chaos!" One journalist jabbed a device into Natsuo's face. "You saved the crawler! Why?" "I'm a rescue hero." Natsuo's instant reply baffled the journalist. Civilian, vigilante, villain. My job is to save anyone who is in need of rescue. Are you saying you'd save a villain? Another voice from the small crowd of reporters piped up. If I'm able to, yeah. Mutterings due to his answer made Natsu's eye twitch. Villains are still people. I don't just forfeit my principles because they've committed crimes. He was getting a little annoyed at the doubting look one of the journalists was shooting him. What would Endeavor do? Probably say nothing and intimidate everyone into leaving him alone. Natsu could do that, but that wouldn't be very rescue hero of him. Okay, what would All Might do? From all the times he and Shota had watched clips of the hero, all Natsu could conjure was a bright smile and some reassuring speech. The latter not being Natsu's style. Starting to fret, Natsu mentally went through the roster of heroes he knew. Sir Nightai popped into his mind, glasses glinting as he pushed them back up. Putting his hands on his hips in a relaxed manner, Natsu grinned at the crowd. I mean, somebody's got to save them from Endeavor, right? He joked at his father's expense, the man's expression twisting into one of disgruntled surprise, lower lip sticking out in a pout. That seemed to do the trick as all the journalists laughed at the comment. A few more unimportant questions and the two heroes were free to go. The live recording to return to one of the journalists updating or discussing something as Endeavor and Frostbite could be seen exiting the hospital lobby in the distance. All for One tapped his finger. Kurogiri's handing him a drink in a delicate porcelain cup. Even with his destroyed features, he could taste the soothing aroma of the hot tea, the flavour more prominent once he drank it. That little ice hero is making quite a name for himself already, and he wasn't even in his third year yet. Nothing impressive, his quirk was mediocre, and all he had to his name was nepotism. Much like Koichi, and yet that spunky vigilante had shown to be impressive out of nowhere. All for One swirled his tea and considered his options. Frostbite doesn't have his father's drive, while Endeavor trained and worked like an obsessed man towards the goal of supporting All Might and making the country safer, not just for his family, but for every family. Frostbite had settled on the inconsequential service of mountain rescues, something only necessary due to the stupidity of the individual. The middle Todoroki-san is nothing more than a watered-down, fragile version of his father, bordering on parody. He didn't even have the novelty of having an ice quirk, his sister being born before him, and the youngest boy was strong, but already wrapped in the delusions of hero society, coddled to a fault. In contrast to their older brother Toya, the passion, the drive, the obsession, the refusal to give up. It was fascinating to watch the young man claw at every obstacle despite being the equivalent of quirkless. With fire in his belly and stars in his eyes, Toya could have truly become a threat to villainkind if his defective quirk hadn't completely foiled his future in heroics. And yet, with the dedication of his family, he was still playing hero. All for One wanted nothing more than to crush that fire like chalk in his hand, feeling everything that makes up Toya crumble and fall apart between his fingers. To watch the embers extinguish, leaving behind only charcoal residue and ash. What a feeling that would be. The potential Toya had if he joined All for One's side was limitless. If only he could find an opening, something to dig his claws into. The demon grinned. It's alright. He has many plans, many options. All it needed was the right quirk, the right moment and the right person. Or rather, people. Having made plans with his friend group to go out for dinner, Natsu left Enji to go home alone, as long as he promised to be back before midnight. Despite his achievements, he was still only a second-year high schooler and child. Welcome home, Ray chimed from the living room as Enji entered the house. Uncle Toshi is here! Shota declared of mighty importance, sitting beside his beloved uncle as the two played a video game together. Toshinori was pitifully losing, and he was actually trying as well. Hey, Enji greeted the blonde, the latter emitting a pathetic whine at Shota obliterating him with a turtle shell in the game. That's one way to beat All Might. Is Toya still shadowing at the hospital? Ray got on her tiptoes to kiss her husband, Enji nuzzling her hair as he asked his question. He is. Fuyumi and your father will be returning from work soon too, she acknowledged, and wrapped her arms the best she could around his waist, feeling his large hand on her upper back. We caught your interview with Natsuo. He handled that pretty well. He did, Enji agreed with a nod, glancing to Harusame trotting into the room and rubbing against his trouser leg with loud purred trills. He leaned down to scratch the white cat a little before picking him up. Harusame purred as he was carried like a baby in Enji's arms. "Do you need help with dinner?" he asked his wife. "No, but I'd love you to help anyway." Ray grinned, practically pulling Enji, and the cat by proxy, into the kitchen, leaving Toshinori to be pulverized by Shoto in the video game. Toshinori is having the best time ever. Chapter 67. Thermodynamic. You can become a hero. Becoming a pro hero came with a horde of paperwork, legalistic languages, and other undecipherable lingo that Natsuo couldn't begin to wrap his head around. Time had flown by, and being in his third year, Natsuo needed to set up his agency and connections. Already, he'd done some training up in the mountains of some local pro heroes, as well as made connections with the emergency services of mountainous areas, promoting himself as a rescue hero. Once the knowledge that Endeavor's son, Frostbite, was specializing in mountain rescues, Yue and Natsuo's third-year homeroom teacher got call after call from various hospitals, ambulances, law enforcement, and all sorts of other first responders offering their support, help, and advice to the young man. Which meant that Natsuo was traveling around Japan for a good part of the year, not seeing much of his friends or family as he bounced from location to location for lessons and instructions on how to successfully, professionally, and safely do mountain rescues, as well as other first aid. A lot of it was medical terminologies, but with a brother like Toya, none of that sort of talk was foreign to Natsuo. Still being a student, however, he kept all of this to the weekdays and legally had to work within certain hours, otherwise the Hero Commission would have to get involved. Shoto saw so little of Natsuo in his last year of UA that after a whole week of his brother being away and returning home, the youngest Todoroki had shouted and pointed at Natsuo's head like it was on fire. "There's more red in your hair!" Shoto cried, proceeding to give Endeavor the heart attack of the century. That evening had been spent with his entire family fiddling with his hair, trying to figure out what was going on. "Is Natsuo going to lose his tolerance to the cold?" Shoto asked curiously, sitting on his brother's back as the older teen was face down on the floor, Toya checking his hair like he was a chimpanzee picking fleas out of fur. "I'd better not." Natsuo's reply came up muffled, face pressed into the carpet of the living room. "I don't think Dad could take it." Enji was hyperventilating in the kitchen, being reassured by his loving wife that Natsuo would be fine and that no, history wasn't repeating itself. Thankfully, it was just a cosmetic alternation, unnoticeable to Natsuo who saw himself every day in the mirror, the red portions of his hair having slightly spread along with his growing hair length. Harrow joked that it was Natsuo's equivalent of getting grey hairs. With all that, Frostbite was really making a name for himself. Between the sea rescue he'd done with Gangorka, the Naohata lockdown, and how proactive he was by establishing himself with first responders and mountaineers, enthusiastic talk was resonating throughout Japan that they'd soon be getting a second hard-working and dedicated pro hero of the levels of Endeavor. Of course, all pro heroes with their title worked hard, but Endeavor was simply of an entirely different caliber, and from the public's perspective, it looked like Frostbite was going to follow in those footsteps, albeit in his own way. Natsuo did miss his friends, but they all kept up with each other and what they were up to. Saichi was working with his father and the police, happily following in his father's footsteps and adoring the quality time they got together as pro heroes. Ibara, as the thorn hero Rosé, was working hard with Uwabami and her agency, aiming to become her sidekick when she graduated, much like Yawara, who wanted to be a sidekick for Toy Toy as Softy, the cute hero. Meanwhile, Ayahiko was making his own rounds, helping out at festivals and events focusing on entertainment. As the candy hero Pop Rocks, the colourful young man wanted to be a hero that kept places like fun fairs and attraction parks worry-free and jovial, especially for little kids. This played really well into his own theatrics and performances, while at the same time keeping an eye out for any troublemakers. Mogura had the hardest time to set up her agency, in her friends' opinion, as she was trying to set it up in her home village, where there weren't many pro heroes for a good few miles, and where people weren't exactly kind to heteromorphs. But the digging hero Mole Girl wasn't disheartened, and she was making leaps and bounds to prove her worth and abilities, aiding the locals in any way she could with disputes, farming, lost cattle, and typical village squabbles. Her grandparents were being incredibly supportive, and from what feedback her friend group got, it seemed that the locals that once looked down upon her with suspicion and disgust were slowly warming up to her. How could they not? She was sweet, bubbly, and helpful, going above and beyond what was asked of her, yet never becoming overbearing. Mogura is considerate like that. Point is, a lot was happening, and in between all the work that led up to graduation and preparing for their adult lives, the third years also had to continue with their regular academic subjects. Something that Natsu, despite it all, was keeping on top of. Being homeschooled by his mother had given him stellar time management skills, and he made sure to praise Rei whenever the topic came up. His mother's happy smile of relief that she'd actually done a good job with her homeschooling was all the motivation Natsu needed to keep going. It was a lot, but he was happy and thriving. Especially when Sir Naitai reached out to him personally and asked if he wanted to team up with him and his father. The details of what exactly were a little vague, as the green-haired man said it was sensitive information and he wanted to speak about it in person with Natsu now that he was soon going to be a full-fledged hero. "You'll be travelling with my intern," Sir Naitai told him on the phone. "He's in second year." With how busy Natsu was, much more so than his classmates, between work experience, duties as the class representative, and doing the groundwork for his agency, not to mention the whole vigilante saga, Natsu hadn't had the time to meet any of his underclassmen. He had no idea what to expect. A brightly grinning blonde ray of sunshine was along the lines of what he'd expect from Sir Naitai's protege, however. "I'm Mirio Tagata, or Lemillion. Nice to meet you, Todoroki." Mirio introduced himself with an energetic bow, using the polite honorifics to his upperclassman. Despite being the year below him, the blonde was the same height as Natsuo. "I'm looking forward to working with you." "Likewise, Lemillion." Natsuo grinned, brown eyes glancing to two other underclassmen, one dark-haired boy and a beautiful girl with big, curious eyes. "Hi, who are you two?" "These are my friends, Nejiro Hado and Tamaki Amajiki," Miro introduced, ushering his shy friend forward to greet the third year. "Nejiri-chan and Sunita, respectively." Before Natsu could greet them, the periwinkled-haired girl was in his face. Hey, are you as strong as your dad? You have the same face, but a completely different vibe. Is that because you have different quirks? Do you have fire and ice abilities because you have red in your hair? Was fighting that big kaiju monster scary?" "No, yes, no, and yes." Natsu shot back as fast as Nejire asked her questions. A delighted twinkle entered her eyes as the older teen answered her without hesitance. "My dad's physically stronger, but I'd say I'm going to be faster since I focus on my speed and stamina. I have my mum's ice quirk, Frost, but my little brother has both fire and ice. His hair is perfectly split down in the middle, white and red. And yeah, the whole vigilante thing was terrifying, but I pulled through." He smiled to the curious girl, the latter hopping on her toes and delighted Natsu indulging her questions. Behind them, Tamaki relaxed at seeing how friendly Natsu is, especially with how he spoke to Nejire. Anybody who was kind to Nejire and answered her flurry of questions was a good person in the teens' books. "We better get going, Tagata. We don't want to keep Sir Naitai waiting," Natsu urged. It was odd seeing such a strange mismatch of characters being such close friends, but then again, Natsu's personal friend group was quite an array of personalities. If anything, it was nice to see. "I'm so pleased to finally meet you," Mirio said as they got onto the train, briefcases holding the hero suits in hand. "You're quite the talk around the school." Natsu was completely unaware about this, nor did he particularly care about how popular he was as long as he did a good job and stuck by his principles. "Is it true you're going to be a travelling hero? There's a new wave of heroes like that." The only hero like that Natsu could think of was Mirko, the bunny girl. She was, literally, hopping from place to place throughout Japan, going wherever she was needed without a home office or headquarters. "Technically, but I will have a home base in Musutafu," Natsu replied. He watched the scenery rush by as the train sped on the rails, taking them to their destination. "The plan is to have an agency here, but have the freedom to be called out to anywhere where my help is needed, lingering in mountainous regions during their most touristic seasons, especially when there's snow," the white-haired teen explained to his underclassman, the blonde listening with interest and silent passion. No wonder he interned with Sir Naitai. His goofy, passionate spirit aligned exactly with what Naitai preached. The more the two talked about their time in UA and about their ambitions and goals, the more Mirio's humor and good-natured personality came through, his mannerisms and jokes often bringing Natsu to the verge of tears of laughter. They were laughing as they walked to Sir Naitai's agency, Mirio retelling his work experience with Centipede and Bubble Girl, the pro hero's two other sidekicks. Said laughter rang out in the agency lobby and caught the pro hero's attention, his stern, strict lines smoothing out at the sound of the happy noise, recognizing Mirio's loud voice. Natsu's, though, he didn't quite recognize, as his voice had matured since they last met, and it had sounded different on the phone. It wasn't like his father, but it was warm, friendly, and laid back. his laughter kind and light. "Sir Nightai, it's great to see you again." Natsuo grinned to the bespectacled man, the latter returning him the smallest of smiles. "Likewise, you've grown well. Congratulations on your achievements. You've wasted no time in making your presence known in Hero Society." Considering he was All Might's honorary nephew, Nightai made sure to keep up with all the Todoroki's whereabouts, something that was easy to do with Frostbite considering how active he was. It was good to see the young boy flowering into a strong young man, with broad shoulders, healthy skin and a twinkle in his grey-brown eyes, soft like his mother's but confident like his father's. "Your father's already out on patrol." "Of course he is." Natsuo rolled his eyes. After some quick introductions to Bubble Girl and Centipede, who Natsuo thought looked awesome, Miria was sent out to join Endeavor on patrol, something the blonde was very excited about, while Nightai brought Natsuo up to date with what it was he wanted to talk to him about. "How familiar are you with the history of the Yakuza?" he asked, pushing his glasses back once they were in the privacy of his office. "Nothing of detail. They used to have a lot of power, but once quirks and heroes became a thing, they lost that power and are now under watchful eye of the police." Natsuo would have to thank Toya again for lecturing him on such topics. These things were somewhat taught in history classes, but Toya was the one that word-vomited quirk history into Natsuo's brain like he'd drown if he did an info dump. "Is that what you've been up to since establishing your agency?" "Partially." Papers were flopped onto Nightai's desk to show some old black and white photographs, as well as more recent ones. The Shihasakai is one of the Yakuza groups that the police has been keeping under surveillance for years now. Ever since All Might's influence spread through Japan, these groups have been pushed to the shadows. They're typically inactive and behave more like a boys' club than any criminal gang. Codes, morals, a sense of belonging, those sorts of things. Natsuo listened with interest, picking up the photos. An elderly man with grey hair and neat traditional clothes really caught his attention, with two young men beside him. One with dark hair and golden eyes, wearing a face mask, and another with grey eyes and white hair with an arrow-shaped fringe. Nothing of note, really, just that they looked very formal and professional, more akin to bodyguards protecting a noble than what the image of a Yakuza brought to Natsuo's mind. "Are you worried?" he asked the pro-hero, waving the photo a bit. "There's nothing to worry about that's visible. Currently, anyway," Sir Nightai replied, fingers tapping his desk thoughtfully. "I'm always keeping an eye on anything that could be a problem, but as of now, nothing about the Shihasakai has raised interest." A beat of silence. "There's a but coming on," Natsuo said, eyes turning serious. Nightai smiled a little. "Observant. Good. It feels like there should be. I have nothing concrete, just a feeling," he explained as he took the photo out of Natsuo's hand and reorganized his research. "Your father and I spoke about this already. Frostbite, what do you think about joining your agency of ours? Publicly, it would mean nothing, but on paper, legally speaking, it would mean you're on a team with my Endeavor and All Might's agency. Ever since that dinner after All Might and Toshinori's secret was explained to the children, Nightai and Endeavor had done as they had discussed, without All Might's say. Publicly, the three heroes and agencies work separately, but behind the scenes, they were a recognized team by the Hero Commission. Considering All Might didn't understand the concept of self-restraint, the Flaming Sidekickers followed his trail of achievements and filled in all sorts of reports before sending them to Nightai's agency, where he and his sidekicks filed them while also filling on their own requests. For the last few years, All Might have been able to continue as a symbol of peace without worrying about the administrative side of things. And now, Natsuo is being offered that same position." He hesitated. "Before you worry, no, it's not because your father is Endeavor," Nightai reassured with a knowing expression. "You're one of the few people who know All Might's identity. You're part of a new generation of heroes, and already before graduating you're having an effect." The man pushed his glasses up again, preemptively stopping them from slipping down. "We're extending this team position to you because you're dependable and we want your help as much as we want to support you." Well, it was Natsuo to refuse the offer after such praise from All Might's former sidekick. Lemillion was everything that Sir Nightai preached of All Might's colour palette. Happy-go-lucky personalities still weren't Endeavor's thing, but after being friends and, dare he admit, brothers with Toshinori and meeting the likes of Hawks, Enji knew better than to categorize any goofy blonde as an incompetent fool. If Sir Nightai saw potential in Lemillion, then who was Endeavor to shrug it off, even if the blonde teen was the polar opposite of himself? "Nightai gave me a rundown of your quirk. the red-headed man said as the two walked during their patrol. Quiet streets with a few cars passing by, and various people getting to where they needed to be on a clear workday. Nothing of note. Impressive work. Mirio beamed at the praise from the number 2 hero. Thank you, Endeavor, sir, he thanked politely. Credit where credit is due, the blonde knew how to speak to his elders while having the burning passion about rival Dormite. Angie had a very good idea as to why Night Eye had taken him on for internships. He wondered why the green-haired man looked so annoyed earlier, though. I do have a question. What is it? Endeavor stopped, looking at the shorter blonde. Despite the boy's goofy expression, he could see focus in those beady eyes. You're not the humoristic type. I believe in what Sir Night Eye teaches, and despite the two of you being opposites, I've never heard him speak a bad word of you. It's not like the pro-hero was the gossiping type, but the green-haired man was straightforward and honest. He did not sugarcoat his words. If not laughter, how do you keep yourself from being demotivated when faced, if you ever have, with failure? Stunned was the only way to describe how Endeavor felt at the moment. His blue eyes widened slightly at the heaviness and weight of the question uttered by such a simplistic, cartoonish-looking face with a smile that bordered on all my parody. Such an important question required a well-thought-out, meaningful answer, especially if the blonde was asking him directly. It seemed this had been a thought that bounced around his happy-go-lucky skull for some time. I focus on my duty. In turn, Mirio's expression turned perplexed, an eyebrow raised to accompany his clueless smile. There have been moments where I've come short. Freezing in the middle of an evacuation, for example. Angie didn't know if he'd ever be able to shake off the shaking goosebumps crawling up his back as he felt reduced to his teen self. That's when focusing on your reason for being a hero is the most important. Mirio wants to save others. He'd been saved as a child by a pro-hero after falling in a river, and he wanted to return the kindness. The million stood for the number of people he wants to save. 1 million, because even if he can't save everyone, he wants to save as many people as he can. That's his reason for being a hero. You're right, I'm not a humoristic man, Endeavor continued, walking forward as to not dawdle on their patrol any longer. Sir Night Eye has said as much to my face. Mirio snorted out a laugh. His peer would be the type to do that. But I know my purpose and my duty as a pro-hero. Failure is, unfortunately, inevitable. You pick yourself up and try again. Work on where you're lacking and focus on the mission. Mirio looked up at the redhead, a new light being shown on the man. Endeavor is stern face and the definition of intimidating. He's ruthless and uncompromising in his work ethic and duties. Mirio couldn't begin to count how many people the man had saved from just going about his day and knowing his city like the back of his hand. And despite his stony face, there was a father-like warmth to his voice as he answered Mirio's question. Honest, yet encouraging. Do you disagree with Sir Night Eye's principles? He dared to ask. Nejire's curious and questioning nature must have rubbed off on him to ask such a question. Not at all. There was no hesitation. There are many principles other pro-heroes have that, while I don't act upon, I believe have worth. Best Genus and his importance on appearances came to mind. The man was in the top 10 for a reason. I'm not inclined to jokes and laughter in the way Night Eye preaches, but he's not wrong. A jovial, optimistic attitude has its place, as long as it's not delusional and actually genuine. What do you mean? Mirio asked, confused. How many times had Enji seen Toshinori force a wary smile that did nothing to reassure him? A distant, dusty memory of his father's tired, weak smile, overworked with dark circles under his eyes that gave him a lifeless look, even as he pet Enji's red hair, crawled into his mind. Nobody's going to be reassured by fake laughter, Endeavor elaborated. Toxic happiness is just as destructive and harmful as a nihilistic attitude. It's good to be optimistic, but if you don't believe in what you preach, you won't save anyone. Mirio hummed in thought at that, his cape fluttering behind him as a soft breeze picked up through the street. I believe I can save 1 million people, and I will, the blonde declared with grounded passion, looking at the redhead with glittering, beady eyes. Endeavor's flames flickered around his features and shoulders as he returned the look, fire in his own eyes. Start with 1. Mirio had the drive and enthusiasm. Endeavor believed him to already be a formidable hero. This part of Japan is relatively quiet, so the unlikely duo got back to Nightie's agency with nothing to report on. Some biker had sped too fast at a red light, but that was it. Endeavor had stepped in before he could accidentally be hit by an oncoming car. Upon returning to the agency, they were peppily welcomed back by Bubble Girl and a focused centipeder who was on the phone with the police about something or the other. There was always something that needed looking to or helped with, even something as small as fixing a detail in a report, or as big as helping in a raid. The latter really didn't happen that much anymore, what with the underground world being so wary of getting stopped by the likes of All Might and Endeavor. Nobody wanted to end up in the hospital having to eat through a straw with a court case to not look forward to. Natsu was helping too, in his hero suit, sorting through some unfinished files and putting them into relevant piles. Accident preventions went here, villain arrests was this pile, and unresolved burglary or minor offences for the police to sniff into were there. "Hey Dad," his son greeted, only momentarily looking up from his duty as he returned to categorizing the piles of files. Sir Nightie said that he wanted the flaming sidekickers to finish filing reports of All Might's most recent villain arrests. The familiar grunt of his father told Natsu the man was already on it, making Vernon aware of the oncoming administrative work. "Is it just me, or is he on edge today?" "Who?" "Sir Nightie," Natsu replied, hesitating for a moment to place one of the files onto a pile, before changing his mind and putting it onto another that was more relevant. "He seems agitated." It was hard to tell considering how stone-faced the man was, but Natsu had spent enough time with his father to not be fazed by anybody's harsh hysteria. "All might," Enji sighed. If the former sidekick was agitated, only the blonde hero could be the cause of it. Nothing else quite shook Nightie's core like hearing of his idol being a fool. "I'll go speak to him." "Good work, Natsu." "Thanks, Dad." Indeed, Endeavor found Nightie sitting at his desk, speeding through reports of an aggressively tapping foot like he was recreating a musical performance from one of All Might's old American movies where tap dancing was prominent. "What has he done now?" Enji asked exasperatedly. Nightie froze and didn't lift his head. He said nothing, lips thinning into a tight line as his eyes were shadowed by the glare of his glasses caused by Endeavor's approaching glowing flames. His hands had stopped mid-movement, a partially turned over sheet on his desk. Enji scowled. "Mirai, I'm not doing this again," he growled. Last time, he'd been All Might's sidekick, dutifully following his orders to not involve Endeavor and his family into their mess. No such obligation existed anymore, and if his dumb brother was out being an idiot again, Endeavor wanted to be the one dragging him by his hair tufts to be scorned by Harrow. What has he gotten himself into this time? Bony fingers splayed out onto the table, flattening the sheets of paper as the younger pro-hero sighed, shoulders drooping. Chapter 68. Feverish. "Are you insane?" It was a wonder that Toshinori's phone didn't explode at Enji's roar, but he did almost drop it in shock and flailed his hands around trying to catch it before it could land in the sand. Off in the distance, young Midoriya had fallen flat on his butt, Enji's exclamation having made him jump. Dropped trash was scattered around him, and he gave the skinny hero a confused, worried look. Toshinori shot him a bright smile and a shaky thumbs up. "Enji, come down, let me explain," he whispered into the phone, hand covering his device as he quickly turned away from his student before the boy could realize what was going on. "Let you explain what? That you've been training a quirkless middle schooler to give one for all to for months? Something you've just told Nightie, but you haven't told Gran Torino, and didn't tell me?" Enji accused shot after shot, each one feeling like a cracked rib in Toshinori's chest. "Does the kid's family know? Is this really what he wants? Does he know what he's getting into? Do you know what you're getting into? Are you even properly training him? Do you even know where to start?" "Come on, have a little more faith in me than that," Toshinori sweated, the force of Enji's questions and doubt in him crushing his shoulders. "I will when you give me a reason to." Enji was dragging Toshinori to his knees. At Toshinori's hurt whimper, Enji sighed and rubbed his eyes, a groan emitting from the depths of his throat. "Toshi, I'm being serious. Do you even know how to train the kid? What's his build? What does he look like?" Toshinori had taken to training like fish does to water, naturally tall and broad even without all the muscle, much like Enji, and hadn't struggled to use one for all in the ways Enji had struggled with his quirk even though he'd originally been quirkless. The number 2 hero wasn't sure how much his number 1 could properly relate to or understand a currently quirkless child the age of Shoto. Enji's eye twitched when his phone buzzed again and saw that Toshinori had sent him a photo. He clicked on it. Toshinori, he looks like a stiff breeze would shatter him. What is your problem? Again, Toshinori's ears rung, his brain bouncing on the sides of his skull as Enji's furious shout made him wince, gaining him another dazzled look from the worried Midoriya, the scrawny boy thankfully not having dropped anything or fallen, but still shaken. He needs to pack on muscle, clearly! Before I give him one for all and he joins UA, I promise I'm thinking this through, if you'll just let me explain. Toshinori said frantically, able to hear Enji's blood pressure rising. You have 5 minutes before I track down your phone and find you. Never before had Toshinori spoken so quickly, rivaling Midoriya's mumbled ramblings, and he wasn't sure if he was making any sense at all. Saving a quirkless boy, the latter so desperate to ask him a question, he pushed All Might to his limits, asking him if he could be a hero only for Toshinori to project his own childhood onto him and telling him no, to then seeing him springing into action and saving his friend in trouble without thinking when all the pro heroes couldn't get close. Enji's breath sharpened. Was the other child alright? He asked. He was. I managed to push my form and save him, the blonde replied. Enji sighed and ran a hand over his face, stopping over his mouth. Blue eyes squinted at the photo of the short, scrawny green-haired teen Shoto's age, wheezing, sweating, and panting as he desperately tried to push a set of drawers across the beach, sun hitting him from the back to cast a shadow on his form and highlight the sweat droplets and strained expression. He looked a mess. You're training him all wrong, he sighed. Toshinori's silence told him he didn't get it. Look at him. The older hero did and saw his student half carrying, half dragging a sink along the sand, gritting his teeth with effort. Struggling, but not giving up. You might be upping his strength and muscle as quickly as possible, but how is he supposed to improve if you don't teach him the foundations? A beat passed and Toshinori said nothing. You did learn the foundations, right? Does getting beat up by Gran Torino count? Toshinori asked nervously, sweating like a pig. You piss me off, you know that? Enji growled out a sigh, getting a headache. Where does the guy who didn't learn the basics of properly training get the gall to scorn him for not having a signature? He's clearly not like you. Let me meet him. Enji, I think his brain would explode if he met you right now, Toshinori said with a laugh. At his brother's annoyed grumbled, a fond smile spread on the blonde's face. It's going to be different for him. All for One is dead and not around anymore. He doesn't have that danger lurking like my master and I did. He'll have all the time in UA to properly learn and train under qualified teachers like Aizawa. Even with that, he's going to be a successor to One for All that's going to set him apart from all the other students. Enji rubbed his temple, frowning as he glared out the window and watched Natsuo and Mirio going on a coffee run for the pro heroes of the Night Eye Agency. Is this going to be a case where I have to trust you? Toshinori's weak laugh was a clear answer. Fine, I will. But after the UA exams, we're all getting involved whether you like it or not. Deal. Enji would give Toshinori the space to train and prepare the quirkless boy for UA in his own way, without snitching to his father and Gran Torino, but that didn't mean he wasn't worrying about the short child. Especially not when he was training Shoto, watching him run on the treadmill. He tried to think how he would feel if Toshinori had gone behind his back and started training his youngest without him knowing. He'd be pissed. Shoto, take a break. Shoto pressed the button on the treadmill to slow his sprint into a walk, and reached for his towel, patting his neck dry from the sweat. Also in the room was Haro and Rei, the eldest Todoroki holding the punching bag for Rei as she did little jabs and punches to warm up, hopping on her feet. Good, your stamina's up, Enji commented as he checked his son's progress, the boy having ran faster for longer than last time. With his brothers both busy with their own things, and Fuyumi's continued disinterested of the home gym, it left Shoto to usually train alone with his father. Which went fine, despite the rocky start to quirk training, with Enji struggling to adapt to his youngest pace, now having found a method that fit the two-tone-haired boy better. He'd also hit a bit of a growth spurt since entering his teens, and his body had broadened slightly. Not nearly as much as Natsuo had at his age, not even Toya's, but it was still noticeable. He was slender yet solid, finding his strengths in his flexibility and natural quirk power, but less so in his stamina and speed, the opposite of his icy brother. Shoto never enjoyed training like Toya and Natsuo did, seeing it more as a necessity rather than a fun activity, but that didn't dampen Enji's own motivation to train his son, especially not with the effort his son was putting in. Not as much effort as he would like, but he tried to keep Rei and Toshinori's words in mind. He'd have all the time in UA to continue to refine and train his skills, just like that green-haired boy. "Good work, Peppermint," Harrow praised, before gagging a bit at the punching bag being thumped into his gut, laughing as Rei apologized for her well-aimed hit. "You never told Natsuo to take a break." Shoto's absent-minded observation sounded like an accusation to Enji's ears. The father looked to his youngest. Mismatching eyes looked back. "You always made him push further." That's true. In moments where he saw Natsuo reaching his limit with whatever it was they were doing, Enji encouraged him to continue a little longer, go a little further, push more. Natsuo always did, and from his grins, he enjoyed doing so. The amazing feeling of pushing his body, hitting a new record, and seeing the next milestone within reach. Enji could see the adrenaline rushing through Natsuo's body, hitting his brain with dopamine. He never saw that in Shoto. Every push and new milestone was hit with panting and struggle. It reminded Enji of the freckled boy on the beach. "Do you want me to push you?" Enji asked, not sure what it was Shoto was getting at. Shoto's mouth tightened into a line, head dropping to look at the numbers on the treadmill. "I don't know," he muttered. "Am I not improving fast enough?" "You're improving at your own pace. A slower pace than Enji, Natsuo, and even Toya. The white-haired man had pushed his flames to a vivid blue before he hit his teens." There was so much Enji wanted to say, but he didn't know how to say it in a way that wouldn't discourage Shoto. The boy could be so sensitive at times. Nothing wrong with that, but it made Enji struggle to mince his tone. "Are you worried?" "I don't know." "Very helpful, Shoto." Enji sighed and rubbed his jaw. Again, his mind returned to the green-haired boy, the trash-covered beach and the glittering ocean. "There'll be times where you think you've reached your limit," Enji started, blue eyes looking to his son still walking on the machine, the child glancing up to him. "It's in those moments where you want to surpass that limit. When it feels like your body's about to collapse, that's when you push further to keep going." He paused, rubbing his thumb over his chin. His scruff was getting long. Rei had told him he better not grow a beard. He'd have to shape it later. "You have a power hidden in you that is stronger than any other. Once you become aware of and accept that fact, you'll find pushing your limits easier." Shoto blinked, and then tripped over nothing, missing a step. He yelped, but Enji grabbed the back of his shirt before his son could smash his face into the buttons on the treadmill, picking him up like a stray kitten off the streets. "Nice catch," Harrow laughed. "Most accidents happen at home," Rei joked, the skin of her scar pulling as she smiled. Chapter 69. Effulgent. The 8th of October. Over 20 years ago, Enji had married Rei. Enji stared at the date of their marriage anniversary like it had just mugged him in plain daylight. It's not like it had come as a surprise. Overprepared and observant Enji had of course planned things well ahead of time, but even now, with his wife in her brand new dress he bought her for the occasion, walking alongside him as they walked through Tokyo to go to a kabuki performance he planned for them both, the reality of just how quickly time had passed still shook his heart. 20 years. And Rei looked as beautiful as she always had. "You've outdone yourself," Rei praised, enthralled by the currently empty stage where the performance would take place. It was huge and full of people. Rei and Enji had the best seats, her man always desiring to spoil her if she'd only ask more of him. "I mentioned once, months ago, that seeing a kabuki in person must be much more interesting than a recording online, and you get us the best seats at the most sought-after show." Rei grinned at her husband, so much like 3 of their children, and that's the only gift Enji would ever ask for Rei to smile at him. "You spoil me." "Only when you let me," he joked, thankful for the dark around them as people got to their seats. If at all possible, he'd like to avoid any endeavorisms today, and dedicate his entire and whole attention to his wife. He'd even gone as far as to not wear his endeavor suit under his civvies. Not that that would stop him from doing any heroisms if he had to, but it's a thought that counts. Musicals, theatre, that sort of thing wasn't in Enji's width of knowledge or particular interests. Fuyumi and Rei were always the ones insisting on watching musicals if the Todoroki ever had a movie night. Not helped by Toshinori introducing his old Hollywood movies to them. But anything traditional to Japanese culture was by default favoured by the red-headed man, proud of his heritage as he was. And if he could find a middle ground between his and Rei's interests that would make her happy, then he would sit and enjoy the performance. If he didn't quite understand the point of certain aspects unique to kabuki, he could still appreciate the story, the outfits, and his wife's face enlightened by the stage lights, and her ecstatic expression at what was happening before her. He could especially appreciate kabuki when it got him a thank you kiss on the jaw after the performance, his delighted Rei running her palm over his stubble. "I'm so glad you didn't grow that beard," she teased. Blue eyes rolled up as Enji snorted. "What else have you got planned?" "Who says I do?" Enji hummed, hand in hand with his much shorter wife, his arm lax for Rei to swing their intertwined arms a little. Maybe that was it. If I was married to any other man than Enji Endeavor Todoroki, I might believe that was the case. The white-haired woman laughed. But this is the first time we've had our anniversary in Tokyo, so I ask again, what else is on the agenda? Enji huffed out a laugh. A quaint tea shop with a seasonal flower gimmick is where he took Rei next. What with it being October, the establishment was filled with various flowers, but namely autumn bellflowers. The way Rei's face lit up at seeing the room the waitress took them to, with those fresh blue petals adorning below table, walls and windows, reminded Enji of when he'd first seen her at that flower garden. Her face had been more serious then, her fond smile barely noticeable, but her eyes had been full of tenderness. Now she wore her heart on her sleeve and her scar on her face. Rei never hid her joys. Despite loving the cold air, Rei still enjoyed tea, especially flowery scented ones like these. Anything Rei wanted to try, Enji went along with it, and he enjoyed every moment of it. They reminisced as they sipped at their teas and tasted the colourful dumplings, sushi and mochi served with their drinks. Their first meeting, how Enji's flames licked his cheekbones, how Rei froze the table. Their second meeting before Enji returned to Musutefu, when Enji learned what her favourite food was. "Do you remember how you felt guilty because you wanted to pay my parents to marry me?" Rei giggled between sushi bites. Enji groaned and hid his face behind his cup. "Don't. I was genuinely ashamed," he laughed. Still embarrassed about it to this day. It just made Rei laugh. Meeting Haro and Toshinori for the first time. Their hug under the cherry blossoms when they became a couple. That time Endeavor exploded into flames when confronted by the press about his secret girlfriend. Thank goodness for Toshinori. Their first kiss at the aquarium. "The kids did end up looking like fish," Enji said flatly, causing Rei to splutter her drink and burst out laughing. That little red and white koi fish, growing up too fast. Soon they'd be fish too big for a small pond. "It's not like I don't think Natsu will thrive, but I'm still worried," Rei admitted. Her biggest baby, now a young man, tall and broad like his father and a bit too excited to get out there on his own. Of course I'm glad he's agreed to join his agency with yours, Night Eyes and All Mights. That does reassure me a bit. He'll be fine. Enji was also worried, but that's because he's a helicopter parent and the thought of his son being far away and being unable to get to and help him at the drop of a hat put his nerves on edge. Just like Toya and Fuyumi are fine. Despite everything that they'd gone through, their two eldest little ones had made it and succeeded. Fuyumi had completely settled into her teaching position, supported by Haro every day, and Toya was more motivated than ever to complete her studies and make a change in the world. "He's so much like you, it's ridiculous," Rei laughed. "Stubborn, driven, and such a nerd." "I'm a nerd," Enji raised a disbelieving eyebrow. "The absolute biggest nerd." The scar on Rei's face pulled slightly as she grinned teasingly. "Dare I say, the #1 All Might fan, even." "I'm insulted," was the flat response that made Rei laugh. "Don't dirty Night Eye's title like that." Rei just laughed more. And their littlest, not so little, baby, Shoto. In barely half a year, he'd be going for the UA entrance exams. His mother's lamented whine was in tune with his father's aching heart at their baby boy not being a baby anymore, just like the rest of their babies. "This is my last year homeschooling, Enji. I've been completely blindsided by the passage of time." Not even the warm tea could comfort that particular pain in Rei's chest. Maybe if you started to get grey hairs, I would have realised how fast time was passing. Enji and his pristine red hair, despite being in his 40s, mocked the concept of aging. "Considering Dad's greying hair, I guess aging gracefully comes from my mother's side," Enji joked with a shrug. "Please, your father looks grand for being 2 years from retirement," Rei waved off Enji's comment. Indeed, Hara had turned 63 this year, right before Enji had turned 45, and in 2 years' time, he'd be officially retiring from teaching. Just how Ray wasn't looking forward to not homeschooling her kids anymore, Harrow wasn't keen on not working anymore neither. Already, he was looking for things to do in his retirement. Surely, that's where Enji's over-preparation came from. Are you still disinterested in learning about your mother? Enji shrugged. Never once had he asked his father about the woman that had abandoned them. He didn't even know her name and barely remembered that one photo he saw as a toddler. It didn't make sense to care for a person who had never been in the picture. Maybe for others, knowing where they came from, getting answers to the endless questions was something to strive for, but to Enji, it just wasn't. Maybe when Hara has retired, you two could talk about her, Ray offered. Enji raised an eyebrow again at her. Just because you don't care doesn't mean your father doesn't. Maybe it would mean a lot to him if you gave him a chance to talk about her. Truthfully, Enji had never considered that. Guilt twinged at his heart. I'll do that, he agreed. Speaking of chances, Hawks and Vernon. You think Fuyumi and Toya have a shot? Ray was far too giddy for love talk. Enji just chuckled. I think we need to know Hawks better before she even considers him. The young blonde man was impressive, but he was shooting up the rankings far too young and quickly for Enji's liking. What was going on with him? What were his goals, his ambitions? What made the winged man tick? That's what Enji wanted at least Fuyumi to figure out before either of them even thought to consider each other. Toya and Vernon most likely would already be dating if he just made a move. Silence spread between the parents as they stared at each other. Any chance Vernon would make a first move? Ray asked with a sheepish smile. Enji mirrored her expression. Study and goal-focused Toya would need a kick in the back from the universe to make any sort of advance onto the fiery-haired psychic. Unfortunately for them both, Vernon was nearly as much of a workaholic as her boss. Was Enji's unconvincing reply. Tea and food consumed, with a dainty singular autumn bellflower in hand, Enji took Ray to one last location, where they'd stay the night. A spa hotel, the best Endeavor's money could get. Considering Ray's flabbergasted expression at the expense of everything of the building, their room and what the spa offered, the best was pretty good. If I didn't know better, I'd think you were trying to upstage a honeymoon. Ray narrowed her eyes in fake accusation at her husband. He tilted his head. Is it working? He joked, before plopping a bag of spa essentials on their unnecessarily huge and luxurious hotel bed. Ray stared at it like it would bite her. Or rather, like it was draining their bank account and she was internally fighting if she should indulge in all of this. Anniversary be damned. Ray. At her husband's voice, she looked up at him with those gentle grey-brown eyes. You deserve it, and I want you to have fun. The new dress, the day in Tokyo, a theatre performance with the best seat, a flower-themed tea shop, the luxurious hotel, and now the spa. All handed to her on a silver platter, merely because she married the man who gave her the chance to choose him. Also birthing 4 children, raising them, homeschooling them, being a dedicated housewife, and taking a blue fireball to the face. Semantics. Ray's unsure expression evaporated to a delighted grin. She took the bag and she was out the door, straight to the spa where she was already expected. Enji was sure he wasn't going to see her until dinner time, at the earliest. Fine by him, because he knew she was going to be having a good time, and it gave him a chance to answer some emails and generally check on any news from his psychics. Nothing of note. Some anon called Stasama had been blocked from the Endeavor Agency's social media because of a needless spamming. Seems they were a bit of a serial hero hater. Some of the psychics had met up with Centipede and Bubble Girl to follow up on reports to do with All Might. Enji wondered how he had the time to do heroics between his body giving up on him and supposedly training that green-haired boy. He still didn't know his name. That's something he hadn't told Ray about yet. He felt like he should tell his wife and father about the blonde's ongoings, but knew they'd react similarly to him and storm the beach. If what Toshinori said was true and the young boy was a starstruck type, Endeavor's wife and father scorning his idol like he was a child wasn't the best first impression. Shoto would actually be the best introduction to the family, being the bridge between the All Might fanboy and All Might's honorary family. Surely, the two fanboys would link arms and skip throughout the next hero convention they came across. Enji rolled his eyes at the thought. Night-Eye would definitely join them. Thinking of his children, he went to the family group chat. Fuyumi was wishing her parents a good day out. Toya was telling them to be grossly in love somewhere they couldn't see. Enji barked a laugh at Chota's reply to his brother, says the sadly single medical student. Hara reacted with too many laughing crying emojis, Fuyumi with normal crying ones, and Toya had left them all on red. Natsu hadn't been online since that morning. Safe to say he was busy with heroisms. He mentioned being in Chiba Prefecture this week for a team-up with a hero called Springer. Enji hadn't been familiar with the name, but after a quick background check, he seemed to be a reasonable mid-30s hero that did good work in his area. Nothing to fault him for, so Enji believes Natsu was in good hands. Enji sent a text saying, "Mom at Spar," and "Good day," because despite having a phone for years now, Enji is still miserable at texting. Of course, a sign of life from his father made Toya come online and demand for Shoto to be reprimanded. Shoto's tongue sticking out emoji didn't go over well with Toya apparently, because Fuyumi sent a text in her and Enji's one-on-one chat, informing him Toya and Shoto had fallen into the koi pond again. Those poor fish. They didn't know a day of peace around the Todoroki boys who seemed to prefer bathing in the pond water than a normal bath. A photo depicting a very soaked set of brothers being told off by their grandfather made Enji laugh. His eldest and youngest sons looked like wet cats. Fuyumi reacted with an eye roll emoji, and pathetic as Enji is with those little faces he didn't quite get, he picked the first laughing one he managed to find after 5 minutes. Rei would certainly have some words about her beloved fish being disturbed. Currently, however, Rei was ignorant of that fact, off in her own world. As soon as she had arrived at the spa side of the hotel, she'd been swiftly taken away by the employees and practically thrown into a sauna. A cold sauna. Cryotherapy, apparently. Rei had no idea such a thing existed, and it did wonders. The same effect a normal sauna would, except any sort of hot sauna would most likely put Rei in a coma within the first minute if she didn't actively use frost to cool down. The cold sauna was absolutely delightful, like bathing in snow. Enji had booked her for the full treatment. Massage, manicure, pedicure, facial, the whole shebang. Mainly because he had no idea what any of it meant. Rei was getting pampered like she'd never been before, and for someone who'd been brought up with very little financial stability and many delusions of grandeur, the knowledge her husband of over 20 years could afford this and freely gift it to her just because he knew it would make her happy warmed her heart. Despite the left side of her face being scarred the way it was, Rei had practically forgotten it existed after all this time, only ever reminded it was even there when she got ready in the morning. There was nothing for her to be ashamed of. She'd gotten that scar protecting her children, just like Enji had said. Not even the spa employees winced at it with just how much confidence Rei carried it. But they were still gentle with a thin skin there. Safe to say, Rei felt like a new woman after the pampering she got, feeling like one of those little handbag dogs perfectly trimmed and groomed with a pink bow on their heads. With the same pitter-patter as a happily fluffed-up poodle, Rei returned to the hotel room. Surely there'd be no more surprises. It would just be some cuddling and watching TV. And ice cream. So much vanilla ice cream. "Enji!" she fake gasped. "Ice cream? For dinner? What would Endeavour say?" A hand on her silk-covered chest, clutching her non-existent pearls. "Think of the children." "The children aren't here, and Endeavour is off duty," was Enji's humoured reply. "But if it's such a disaster, more for me." "Hey, no, give me that," Rei laughed, her unfairly tall husband keeping the ice cream pot the size of her head well out of reach. It was a good stuff as well, with a little black vanilla dots. Fuyumi would be so jealous. "Ice cream for dinner," she muttered with a mouthful of the sweet treat. What can I say? I'm full of surprises. Just as Rei had allowed herself to indulge in a much-deserved spa treatment, Enji indulged in ice cream. Never the enjoyer of sweets, but he'd learned to appreciate vanilla over the years, considering it being his wife and daughter's favourite flavours. And Hawks's, apparently. "This is the first proper date to ourselves we've had in years," Rei commented fondly as they sat in front of the TV together, watching some random movie that they stumbled across halfway through, less watching it and more for the sake of background noise to accompany their ice cream. The blue autumn bellflowers keeping them company on the coffee table. Feels like the early days. Between the kids, life, and work, Rei and Enji's date nights had been few and far between. They still managed to have an evening to themselves every few weeks. Rei would often bring Shoto to the agency to have lunch with Enji during his break, and they'd celebrate their anniversary every year, but never anything like this. Not a full day and a bit dedicated to just the two of them enjoying each other's company. And yet, despite all that passing time, it felt so natural to be together like this. Enji hummed in agreement. The movie wasn't of particular interest, but his wife is. He watches her as she keeps her eyes on the screen, spoon still in her mouth. Her hand is around her cup of ice cream, a little frost spreading from her fingertips with dainty patterns to save it from melting. Much unlike Enji's, which was in a molten state, quickly liquefying. He found the difference amusing. Long white lashes fluttered at his soft chuckle, the long white strands of Ray's hair emphasized by the light of the TV screen in the dark room, the city lights outside barely affecting it. She lifted her head to smile at him. "What?" she asked, laughter in her voice. Enji moved his hand to place his ice cream next to Ray's, and she too laughed at the difference. "You hot-blooded creature, you." "Implying you're not," Enji mused. "Are you actually a koi fish in disguise?" Ray rolled her eyes and stuck her tongue out at him, not helping the cold-blooded allegations as she nuzzled up against her husband's warm side like a lizard to a hot stone. "Would you still love me if I was?" she teased. A warm arm wrapped around her shoulders, and Enji propped his chin atop her white hair. "Assuming you've been hit by a stray quirk in this hypothetical scenario that turns you into a fish, yes, I would." Maybe it was the sugar, or the fun day out, or just because he felt so relaxed and content, but Enji could easily bounce Ray's banter back. "But I would be frantically looking for a way to turn you back." Or maybe they'd just been married for so long that no topic or hypothetical fish-turning scenario felt too silly to discuss. Enji would take silly over heart-wrenching conversations any day. They'd had enough of the latter. Pleased with the answer, the couple settled into a comfortable silence to continue dutifully eating the vanilla ice cream, though Enji's was basically soup at this point. A droplet of vanilla got onto his thumb, and he quickly licked it off before it could get on either his wife or the hotel couch, not realizing he smeared some on the corner of his mouth in the process. Ray noticed. Enji jumped out of his skin when something wet quickly swiped the corner of his mouth, staring incredulously at his wife who had just licked the ice cream away. First time for everything, and faced with the novelty, Enji's cheeks reddened in embarrassment, flames flickering around his cheekbones as he pouted. "Could have told me," he grumbled, and his eyes looked away, embarrassment not helped by Ray's amused giggle. Placing the empty cups on the table, she tried to push herself up into his line of sight, but her husband tilted his head back so only the top of her head was visible. Hands were on his shoulders, and still, Ray was too short to properly push herself up. Maybe years ago, Ray would have been equally embarrassed, and maybe in another lifetime, she wouldn't be able to stand her ground for the things she wanted. But she's a Todoroki, and Todoroki are stubborn. Wriggling in the same way Harusame does when he's about to pounce on one of his feather toys, Ray pushed off the couch with her knees and used her momentum to push herself up, one arm against the back of the couch for support. Her face was suddenly very close to Enji's lit-up one, and he visibly panicked. "Careful," he hissed, slipping his body down on the sofa to get his literally burning cheeks away from his wife's already scarred face. With a silent huff, Enji stared up at the ceiling, flat on his back, before his vision was obstructed by a very smug Ray. Playing dirty. The woman grinned down at him, before propping her chin just below his collarbones, their chests pressed together. Ray's entire body fit perfectly on top of his like a husband was a specially ordered mattress, and she kicked her legs in the air. White hair splayed out over her back, one of Enji's hands playing with some loose strands as it found itself on her lower back. He became dazed with a sweet adoration in his wife's half-lidded eyes, only fueling the flames on his cheeks. "What are you thinking about?" he breathed out, the silence too strong. The sounds from the TV were non-existent to them. "You have really pretty eyes." Ray's murmured-out phrase shouldn't make Enji's heart beat like it did. Such a nothing compliment shouldn't get to him like they always did after being married to her for so long. His bobbing Adam's apple didn't go unnoticed. "You don't believe me?" "I believe you think so." Autumn bellflowers are a rich blue, dark like blueberries, framed by green leaves, a contrast to the intimidating, vibrant turquoises looking at her softly. Yet Ray knew how delicate those eyes could equally be. She'd seen them stern and fiery, anguished and watery, or like now, warm and soft. Like petals who survive a rainstorm sparkle beautifully when the sun comes out, Enji's eyes, framed by his little flames of embarrassment, showed a hard-working man allowing himself to soften around the woman he loves. Ray moves, and for a second, Enji frets that the moment is over and that she's going to leave. He wants her to stay close to him, for as long as he can have her. But she's instantly back, with the blue flower in her hand. His confusion is short-lived as the flower is neatly tucked behind his ear, the petals and leaf tickling his left temple and cheekbone. The flame that had stubbornly remained snuffed itself out. Ice swirls onto his chest when he looks at Ray. He wonders what she sees. What she sees in him that made her accept him and their relationship so quickly. How could someone as sweet as her be okay with someone as rough-edged as him? His thoughts are instantly shut down when Ray softly kisses him, her frost gently creeping up his exposed neck. Chapter 70. Loosened. It was unreal to Fuyumi that her littlest brother was actually taller than her. He had been for quite some time now, but only when he'd asked her if she could take him ice skating to practice his balance did it really register that Shoto wasn't the little biting baby she knew anymore. He was a teenager preparing to enter high school. He was still a snapping turtle, but even that regular occurrence had become rare now, what with Toya being in classes or work studies all day. And with Natsuo gone majority of the time as well, he couldn't practice skating with anyone. His mother didn't use her quirk even for non-household things, and their father's fire quirk wasn't much use to ice skating. "Sure," Fuyumi had chirped at Shoto's sweet request. "Why don't you ask Ida to join? Let's make it a fun day out." Shoto's face beamed at the notion of bringing his childhood friend along. Since Ida was in regular middle school, he didn't have as much flexibility in his schedule as Shoto did. Yes, homeschooling still required a lot of discipline when it came to time management, but Ray and Shoto often shifted things around and made their own schedule, especially since Natsuo joined UA and it was just the two of them. A quick phone call to the Ida household later, and a date was created. Turns out, speed doesn't necessarily translate to balance and grace. Tenya drifted slowly on the ice despite not moving and looking like a stone statue. Fuyumi didn't think that was even possible. "Relax, Tenya," Shoto said with a soft laugh. "You're too tense." "If I so much as flex my diaphragm, I will land flat on my back and make a fool of myself," the bespectacled teen said stiffly. Shoto made it a point to retell the story of his brothers and father ending up in a pile, but that did little to ease Tenya. "I'm quite alright like this, thank you. Go practice." Considering that Tenya looked like he was trying to avoid the wrath of a gorilla with how still he was, Shoto shrugged and decided to go for a round of the ice rink, joining up with his sister who skated like the professional she was. With how much her younger brother had trained with Natsuo over the years, the boy wasn't stumbling or skating backwards uncontrollably anymore, and in fact had very good balance. He'd never be the image of elegance that his sister was, but he wouldn't fall flat on his face during a fight or chase neither. "You're going for the recommendation exam?" Fuyumi asked with raised eyebrows, as her and Shoto chatted a bit about him going into UA. "Did Dad ask you about it?" "No, Natsuo did." Shoto shook his head, keeping his focus on the ice before him as to not bump into or trip over anyone. "Actually, he told me to go via the recommendation route. Says I'm too high tier for the regular entrance exam." The tone of his voice clued Fuyumi in at his hesitance. "He's not wrong. I haven't trained with you, but I've seen what you can do. You're of a completely different caliber, Peppermint. You deserve the recognition that goes with that and your hard work," the older sister reassured with a smile. "But Natsuo works hard too, and he didn't go for the recommendations," Shoto argued, looking guilty, like he was getting a special privilege nobody in the family got, despite Natsuo having turned down the chance to do the examination Shoto would. "Why should I? Just because I'm better?" "I'm not better," Shoto snapped instantly, without any venom, only a reaction. "I'm not. I'm just... If I may." Ida had overheard the end of the conversation now that Fuyumi and Shoto had done a round of the ice rink and returned to the frozen stiff friend but had somehow managed to continue drifting. "Your potential is much higher than a regular person's. Having a combination of two quirks like yours is fantastic. Getting the right recognition with that will mean you're not only taken more seriously, but you're put in the correct class to train you in the ways that you need." All this was said with very minute chopping motions, Tenya still worried about losing balance. Shoto blinked with his mismatching eyes at his friend, and looked down to Fuyumi, trying to see if she agreed. The shorter woman looked up to her little brother, and all she could think is that it was frightfully unfair that she was the shortest of the siblings. "You think I should go for it?" Shoto asked Tenya. "Unquestionably," was the enthusiastic reply. "You're not, I don't know, jealous or mad?" Fuyumi blinked at Shoto's question and gave him a quizzical look. Her brother blushed a bit, ashamed. I don't want anybody to assume I think I'm better than them, or anything." "Toya." "Why would they?" Tenya's entire body language changed, suddenly relaxed and equally as quizzical as Fuyumi. If anything, any reasonable person would be happy for and proud of you. I'm very proud of you. I know you work hard, not just for yourself, but for your family. Tenya put a lot of importance on them being the legacy of their hero-filled families, not something Shoto necessarily shared, but still understood. He appreciated the family-oriented aspect of his friend. I have no doubts your siblings are too. Of course we're proud. Fuyumi grinned and linked her arm with Shoto's. Just like we're proud of Natsuo and Toya for their achievements. Remember how we feel each time Natsuo wins the sports festivals? 3-time #1 champion, Natsuo was untouchable. It didn't matter how much better the rest of his classmates got, Natsuo was just that much further ahead. Shoto smiled. Yeah, he said softly, before gaining some confidence. Yeah, okay, I'll go for it. As you should. Just don't bite anyone. Tenya narrowed his eyes on his shorter friend. Shoto grinned, revealing his teeth, of which both people with him had been victims of. No promises. Consider me relieved to not be taking the same exam as you, Tenya said with reinforced gusto. Now, can you please help me off of the rink? I'm stuck. A break was a good idea. After managing to slide Ida back onto steady ground without anybody breaking their teeth on the ice, they all sat at the food area and got some hot green teas. Ida, happy to be sitting, sipped on his tea with an appreciative hum. Being a teen himself, preparing to go into UA and having trained with his own hero family, he'd gained some muscle and his shoulders had broadened as a height spurt hit him. His legs were his pride and joy, of course, but he'd made sure the rest of his body was of the same standard as his quirk. I've never gone ice skating before. It's quite the workout, he admitted, pushing his glasses back and smiling to the fellow bespectacled woman. Quite the kicking power you could have there. Fuyumi giggled. Oh, I'm not a fighter, she brushed off, tucking a hair strand behind her ear. Though I probably should get a little self-defense training going. Things could have gone really wrong when that villain attacked my friends and I. Good thing Mum was there. Nobody's tried to attack you since, though, Shoto remarked from behind his hot cup of tea, which he was holding with his left hand to keep it warm. Most things he preferred cold, but green tea wasn't one of those things. I think Mum scared them off. Really, it's scandalous anybody even tried to attack Endeavor's family, Ida huffed. That's just asking for trouble. Attacking anybody part of a hero family is. Shoto and Fuyumi both smiled at the teenager, offended on their behalf at the failed kidnapping attempt. But I would agree that learning a little self-defense is a good idea, or at least having some way of protecting yourself. Did you know, Fuyumi once made knuckle dusters using her frost to punch a bully? Fuyumi squeaked in embarrassment, cheeks reddening, especially at the startled look her brother's friend gave her. Weren't you, 4? Fuyumi was gone back out on the ice before Shoto could interrogate her further about the story he already knew inside out. It was a Todoroki favorite. Because he's a brave boy and not a quitter, Ida made another attempt to properly skate. He was still stiff as a board with all the elegance of a rhinoceros, but he managed to relax enough to move forward and do a few rounds of Shoto and Fuyumi, though trailing behind. Despite his lack of practice in this particular activity, he was having a great time, and already thinking of how it could benefit his training. Maybe one day you'll need to go super fast. My ice in combination with your engine, you'll be able to reach incredible speeds, Shoto offered, tapping into that Toya mindset the elder sibling had brought into the family. Plus, ice skating helps train our balance, focus, and stamina. Ida loved the idea. That'd be something to consider when they both got into UA. When, not if. Definitely when. An hour or so later, and the trio was starting to get actually hungry. Having a proper big girl job, Fuyumi decided to treat her brother and his friend for lunch somewhere. With it being the weekend, many places were full, but everything was open and available. We're pretty close to the children's clinic Toya is doing his work studies at, Fuyumi pondered as she looked for places to eat. Should I call him up and see if he's free to join us? Shoto was all too fond of the idea and nodded eagerly. Toya was in good spirits when Fuyumi called him, and he suggested a soba restaurant that was midway between their locations. He liked to go there for his lunch breaks when he was craving more than what he'd brought from home. Hearing Soba calling his name, Shoto was pumped to get going, though it didn't show on his face. Ida was happy with anything, content to just spend time with his friend and let himself be treated, although he did fuss with Fuyumi about paying for his share of the meal. Fuyumi was quick to shoot the teenager's argument down. Heyo, Fuyu, Peppermint. Nice to see you again, Ida. Toya greeted when he got to the restaurant, chucking off his light jacket onto the back of the empty seat next to Shoto. Ida nodded his head in polite greeting. Had fun ice skating. Conversation was easily started, with everybody having things to say. Drinks and food were ordered. Being a fan of beef stew, Ida got some beef udon, while Fuyumi got a noodle soup. The soba's really good here, Toya told Shoto, who was contemplating the options despite soba being his favorite food. It rivals Mom's. That was enough to convince Shoto to order the same dish as his brother, as if he'd order anything else. Since when do you like soba? Fuyumi joked. Udon was always your thing. Heat was always Toya's thing. He always asked for his food hot and spicy, especially when he was little. But as he'd grown, as he allowed himself to branch out into other interests and become more of himself, he dared to experiment with foods as well. An embarrassed flush rose on his cheeks. I've always eaten soba when we've had it at home. Considering it was Shoto's favourite and up there as one of their mother's comfort meals, the dish was no stranger to the Todoroki. You say that as if I ever hated it. We don't need to tell you, but Toya's obsessed with Endeavour, which means anything fire or heat related by proxy. Fumi told Ida like her older brother wasn't sitting right in front of them. So believe me when I say, we're all very shocked to hear Toya order something cold out of his own free will. Ida nodded solemnly with understanding at the very serious business. Surely this would break their fire father's heart. Shoto's muffled laughter did nothing to help the situation, and Toya just sat there, embarrassed. You're making this into a way bigger deal than it needs to be, he uttered. I'm happy we have the same favourite food, Shoto offered sweetly, as if the mouth those words were coming from hadn't caused just as much, physical, pain to Toya. Snapping turtle of a little brother he was, Shoto always had sweet things to say. And if you like this place, then the soba has to be good. And delicious it was, the two brothers indulging in their cold soba with approving delight. If I may ask, is that a hawk sweater? Ida's question made Fumi almost choke on her broth, coughing a little. I wasn't aware you were a fan. I'm not like Shoto is with All Might. Fumi frantically tried to justify herself. Words tripped themselves out of her mouth as she tried to explain the context behind the gift, that Hawks worked with a friend. And since I'd met him before, she brought it to me as a gift. Toya's snickering got him a swift kick to the ankle. But, been there, done that, he instinctively lifted his feet off the ground under the table, and Fumi accidentally kicked Shoto instead, who just jumped and looked at his sister with perplexed offense. We've met Hawks twice now. Well, Fuyu's met him thrice, before any of us. Toya explained with a smug grin, gaining murderous daggers from his sister. A decent guy based on the little we've seen of him. Seems to keep himself busy. Sounds like he's quite similar to your father and All Might in that aspect, Ida hummed. Which makes sense why he's well on his way to becoming third in the polls, though I believe a large part of that has to do with his approval ratings. Similar to his father. Toya could see that, but he didn't know the blonde man well enough to agree or disagree. Being young and skyrocketing through the charts indeed was a very Endeavour-like trait, and it was clear the man his sister's age was good at what he did, not to mention liked by many. Especially young women. Fumi fit right into that demographic, but for different reasons, and Toya knew it. His sister had never been interested in heroes. She never once made any remarks about boys, and yet one wing flap from this new face, and suddenly their sister had a new interest. It didn't go unnoticed by the observant Toya. Nor did Hawks' tenderness towards his sister. All I know for sure is that he's a foodie and likes chicken, Fumi remarked softly behind her noodle soup. And you're a brilliant cook. Toya's own muttered remark from behind his soba was only noticed by Fuyumi. Shoto and Ida already back to discussing their UA entrance exams and what they do to prepare. I don't like Hawks that way. His sister tried to argue when they left the restaurant, her voice low so the two teenagers a bit further ahead of them wouldn't hear. Sure you don't, Toya scoffed. That's why you wear his merch and keep up with everything he does. You do that with Dad, what's that implying? The elbow to his side made Toya gag. I've been a fan of Dad since conception, just like Shoto has been of All Might, and even Natsu has a childhood hero. He argued with a strained voice from the assault, hand on his side to protect it from any further abuse. You've never been interested. And now you are. I think that's worth thinking about. How about you mind your business and think about burning instead? That made Toya stop in his tracks and stare at Fumi like she just stabbed him with her ice. Low blow, Ice Cube. Low blow. The wounded animal act didn't work on Fumi. She just rolled her eyes. I don't know anything about the man behind the mask. I can't be interested in someone whose real name I don't even know. Pretty eyes and golden hair doesn't cut it, she said as she resumed walking, Toya following her to catch up with their brother and Ida. So you admit you find him pretty? He dodged another elbow attack. Yes, Fuyumi finds Hawks very pretty, but that's not enough. She likes what Hawks does and the potential he has to offer, but so much about him is a mystery that it made it daunting to consider anything more. Not to mention, Hawks wasn't exactly making his own moves or showing any clear interest. What text they had was mostly small talk, and any attempt to get to know the man behind Hawks was cleverly avoided or jokingly answered. It made Fumi wonder what it was the blonde man was hiding. She's a teacher to little kids, a sister, and a daughter in a house full of people who have struggled for years with their emotions and admitting to things that embarrass them. In some ways, she has that tendency too. She'd grown up with Toya hiding and licking his self-made wounds. Fuyumi can tell when a man isn't being honest or avoiding the truth. What is Hawks hiding?
My Father's Warmth is currently ongoing. I will be posting audiobooks every 10 chapters. Thank you everybody for watching, and thank you to my channel members.
Shota spread a button on this. Shota spread. Blah 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 blah. Enji jumped out of his skin when something wet quickly. Rude.